Welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast.
Hello there from Bedford. How are you all? How are you all coping with the lockdown? I know I ask this almost every show now, but I do hope you're all okay. It's definitely a test for everyone being stuck at home, only allowed our daily one government-approved hour of exercise. But I do hope you're all okay. I hope you're staying healthy in mind and body. Anyway, welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast, which is brought to you by the mighty Kraken, the best place to buy, sell and trade Bitcoin. I'm your host, Peter McCormack, and today I've got a bonus interview with Junseth. I don't know if you all heard my previous interview with him and Chris DeRose, but this is another monster, 3 hours and 20 minutes long. But before we get into that, I do have a message from my show sponsors. So firstly, let's talk about CoinTracker, and I caught up with Chandan recently. He told me that they've had a whole bunch of inquiries from people who listen to the show. So thank you for that. It's definitely an interesting sponsor to have. I had a few people write to me and say, why are you supporting a tax company? This is anti-Bitcoin. You're supporting the man. What the fuck are you doing, Pete? And I did have to think about it. I spoke to Chandan about it. I actually recorded a show with him, so you should probably check that out. But the reality is, tax is a choice, but not paying it comes with consequences. I do pay my tax. I don't want to. Of course I don't want to, but I do pay my tax because I don't want to end up in jail. So if you are like me, if you're like accepting it and you do want to pay your tax, then definitely check out CoinTracker. It makes it really easy to get through those complicated tax returns for Bitcoin. Filings work in the US, UK, Canada and Australia, and if you've got less than 200 transactions, it is free to use. If you have got more than 200 transactions, well, you can get a 10% discount. You just have to use the link cointracker.io/A/WBD, and CoinTracker is CoinTracker.io. Also, big shout out to my new sponsor sportsbet.io, and today is the premiere What Bitcoin Did poker tournament hosted by sportsbet.io. They've got over a Bitcoin in prizes, including bounties for taking out me or Dan Held or Luke Martin, even Leah Ward, although that'll be pretty easy because she's rubbish at poker. Now, if you want to register, you can find out more. It's up on my website. Just go to whatbitcoindid.com/sportsbet. It's on tonight. Looking forward to this. But also, if you want to check out Sportsbet, even though coronavirus has locked down lots of sports now, you can go on there and you can bet on Russian ping pong. Also, outside of that, they do have markets for esports. They've got an eFIFA. They've also got their Bitcoin casino and my favorite, the poker rooms. Loving that, guys. Anyway, amazing new sponsor to have. Big shout out, big thanks to the guys for sponsoring my podcast. If you want to find out more, head over to sportsbet.io, which is sportsbet.io. Okay, before we get on to the show today as well, I just want to give another shout out. The Human Rights Foundation have organised COVIDCon, which is going to be on Monday and Tuesday next week. This is some amazing work by Alex Gladstein and the team there. Definitely worth checking out and registering at covidcon.com. Definitely something I'm going to be tuning in for. Loads of amazing speakers there, so nice work there, Alex. Okay, so onto the show, and like me, you're probably in a lockdown, probably getting super fucking bored of this shit. Well, I've got a massive show for you today. The other day, it was in the morning, I was scanning through Twitter, lying in bed as I do most mornings, and there was a tweet from Brian Hoffman saying he was missing Bitcoin Uncensored and the way Junseth and DeRose used to cut through the bullshit. Junseth was there in the thread, so I pinged him and said, look, what are you up to, man? You want to make a show? And he said yes. So without any planning, any prep, we hopped on and we recorded a 3-hour monster. Well, it's over 3 hours, actually. I think it's my longest show ever. We covered a lot in this. We got into coronavirus, the politics of the pandemic, as well as the economic impact. We also discussed libertarianism, something I've been wrestling with recently, modern art, and of course we get into Bitcoin narratives. Hold it together. I know some of the things in this might trigger some people, but look, the reality is this show isn't just about being a Bitcoin cheerleading service. Sometimes it's important to question things. I like to question narratives. I like to question libertarianism. I like to question some of the leading things around Bitcoin because I definitely think about it differently from other people. So I think it's important stuff to do. If you do have any questions about it, you can reach out to me. I will answer any email as long as you don't send me any bullshit. My email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com. Also, if you are really bored in the lockdown, you want to do something else, I do have some other shows on my Defiance podcast. That's defiance.news. And I've also been making films this year, so a couple of those are up there. Please do check those out. Also, would love your feedback. It'd be really interesting to hear back from you. Anyway, hope you're all well and all safe, and I hope you enjoy the show. And again, if you want to reach out to me, it's hello@whatbitcoindid.com. How you doing, man? How's Florida?
Good. It's good. Florida is boring right now because nobody's doing anything. So, yeah. But how is? Where are you again? Africa.
Bedford, dude. Bedford. Motherfuckers locked. So I've been locked down since. This is like my 5th or 6th. I can't even remember because when I went out to Turkey, to the Greek-Turkey border when it was kicking off there, and I was sick when I came back. Like really sick. So my assumption was I had the virus, and in hindsight, I'm pretty sure based on all the symptoms I had it because I was really sick for quite a long time, but I had this real bad body ache. I couldn't, but I had a cough, but I couldn't tell if the cough was just because I'm like a vapor or because I was sick. I had the temperature, but I had this body ache like I never had. And then
I've heard it from a lot of people. I know a couple people that have had coronavirus now, and they have described the body ache as unreal, unlike anything they've ever had.
Yeah, I've had flu body aches before, dude, but this one really fucking sucked. Like really sucked. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it sounds like that's exactly what you had. Then you probably had coronavirus.
You know what? And the funny thing is, I won't know. So I don't know if I'm immune. I don't know if I can spread it, whatever. But yeah, it was pretty rough. But yeah, so I've been locked down for ages. And lockdowns, I'm not even used to a lockdown because I'm used to traveling every 2 or 3 weeks, getting on a plane, going to another country. And then to be stuck at home for this is like, what, a 5th or 6th week sucks. And also, it's like really good for my kids. So they're loving it because they're used to me going away and they hate that. But yeah, so what are the rules? What are the state rules?
Okay, so the state rules are fairly loose. I think that they're trying to enforce a couple of things, but no one cares. So like if they say don't go outside, people are going to go outside anyways. It doesn't really matter. They're not stopping anyone outside for doing it. You know, people are outside exercising and doing all sorts of things everywhere in Florida. It's almost as if it's not on lockdown, but people are like much more courteous right now, making sure that they're not getting themselves sick or not getting you sick. So like when I'm walking down a sidewalk and I see someone up in front of me, it seems like there's some unspoken rules now about a person proceeding to the street and giving you like 20 feet of room. So that's, I mean, honestly, Americans are really good about this kind of thing, and we do it because I think in other countries they take a lot of latitude with regard to their ability to like lock things down. In America, we don't really have the ability to do that constitutionally. So, the government kind of tries, and in a lot of liberal states, they're doing a little bit more draconian measures. Police arrested somebody in California the other day while kayaking alone in the ocean.
I know, that's ridiculous. I saw that.
Someone else got arrested while playing softball with his daughter alone in the park. Like, these are stupid things that are, they're probably going to either sue and win some money when this is all over, or they're just going to like demand an apology from the police department. But like, you can't do that in America. It's just not something that's really to be done. There's actually a really interesting thing going on right now. I think it's in Utah with a guy named, I think, Ammon Bundy. He's pretty famous because a few years ago he stood up to the government in a land rights dispute, which he ultimately won in court, and the government actually killed one of his compadres. And
hold on, was this the one where the militia came out and defended him?
Yes,
I remember that story. I fucking love that story.
So he's at it again. He's saying that he's going to do an Easter service. Government be damned. Is it Idaho? Maybe it's Idaho. And the government be damned. He's going to do an Easter service. He's going to try to get 1,000 people there. Meanwhile, Idaho is spiking in terms of cases, COVID cases.
What's his name?
So, Ammon Bundy, I think. Ammon Bundy.
Yeah. He's an interesting dude. He's that full independent, I'm American, leave me the fuck alone guy, right?
Dude, I gotta say, he seems to understand sort of the spirit of America. I mean, this is what I was thinking about it today. He's doing something really stupid, I think, but he's doing it for all the right reasons. And it's the most American thing you can do. He's doing it principled. I don't know how to say that. Principled. He's doing a principled move, philosophically sound, but stupid in practice. he's going to get a lot of people sick. But at the same time, I do have to say, like, America. I mean, I was looking at people tweeting yesterday because in Wisconsin they had to vote, and I was seeing people tweet about how Americans aren't going to die just to go cast a ballot. And I was like, I think they're missing the point. We literally invented dying to go cast a ballot. That was like the American way. That's the entire thing that we did. We had a war with a humongous, very well militiaed country, and we fought that war by arming all of our citizens and having them, pick up guns and go into the battlefield untrained, and just overwhelmed Britain essentially.
Well, I think I think we were kind of felt for you, and we thought we kind of gave you a chance, man.
Yeah, we did better than you guys ever wanted to. So, no, I think it's interesting because
well, fuck you. You still got shit tea.
Yeah, well, I'm a jingoist. Someone called me that yesterday on Twitter. I was like, yeah, like Americans are jingoists. Like that's fine. It's interesting to me that the American spirit is sort of very alive and well, and in certain areas, in certain people, and then there's a whole group of the population that's kind of forgotten what the frontiers person is like. There was that great show. Who's that Jewish comedian that does all like Borat? What's his name again?
Oh, Sacha Baron Cohen.
Sacha Baron Cohen. He did that. He did one thing where he got some Israeli lawmaker to talk about teaching like kindergartners to shoot guns, and it's very funny.
Yeah, he had the pedo detector.
Yeah, he did. He does a bunch of these. I mean, they're very funny bits. But then, like, you go back not so long ago. I think 1984 maybe was when Old Yeller came out, and Old Yeller's. I mean, it was probably sooner, like 70s probably. But there's a scene in it where the young kid takes up the gun. He's like 13 years old, and he has to shoot the dog. And clearly he's been trained in shooting guns. I mean, there's a distinct sort of separation between the Middle West and the middle states of America and these East Coast and West Coast city states, and even the northern areas of them. So like, Northern California's farmland. But people don't realize that all of like the rest of America, they're out there shooting guns with their kids. Dude, to them, it's anathema.
Listen, look, I find the U.S.
You guys are barely allowed to like hold knives. So.
Yeah, we're probably someone invented this new knife which has a blunt end because of all the problems we've got with knife crime in the UK. And there's like we've invented a new knife with a blunt end, and I was like,
is that really an invention?
Nobody had done a blunt-ended knife to end knife crime before, but they failed to recognize that there's like.
So they invented a club.
But they failed to recognize it. It's like even if you ban guns in the US, how many are already out there? Like hundreds of millions. There's hundreds of millions of knives. It's like people will find another way of killing each other.
Well, a knife is just a piece of metal. Like the idea that you can't fabricate one. I mean, if you have a knife with a blunt end, just send it through a sharpener. And now you have a knife with a sharp end. Like that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's a piece of stainless steel, and you just need a little grinder that like grinds it down to a sharp point.
Dude, there's guys in prison.
Don't tell the terrorists that, though.
The guys in prison are able to make a knife out of like a razor and a pen. Yeah, I'm sure it's not going to stop it.
Well, I mean, knives are very interesting devices from a physics perspective, right? Like it's a thing that is, it's about like this object that comes down to like a very, very sharp point. And the reason is because you transfer the force of like hitting something with it and it cuts. That's what it is. That's what cuts you is, the force of your hand coming down is transferred to this sharp point. So like if you make a knife with a blunt end, it's not really a knife anymore. And, we have a lot of knives, but in the US, the thing that's really interesting, I don't think people know how many guns we have. In the United States, every single year, there's something like 16 million people that go hunting. 16 million people in the United States are able to shoot at long distances and have a rifle, right? 16 million. The biggest standing army, I think, is China's, and I think they have 4 million people. Like, good luck. Have fun.
I think in the UK we've got like 7 lords who go out and hunt a fox twice a year.
Yeah, and they're probably shitty at it. You know, although they're probably good at shooting from a horse.
Yeah, actually they've even banned that now. So they probably just like shoot a dart with some dye in it and then let the fox go.
Just so you know, I don't know if you know this as a what are you, Englander? UKer?
Well, they say British, but if you say British,
Yukin?
that you're including the Welsh and the Scottish in there as
Brit.
well.
Oh yeah, and you don't like them.
Well, I mean, no, it's different. It's weird. I tell you what it is. Like, I'm half Irish.
They don't like you that much, right?
Well, again, it's there's a mix, right? So, like, what you've got Ireland, but which is split into the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. So my dad is Irish. He's from the Republic of Ireland, right? So I'm half Irish. So get on with them. They got on with us. But the Irish, surprisingly, the Irish hate us less than the Scottish. And we've really fucked the Irish over the years, right? I mean, we essentially stole a quarter of their country. And the Northern Ireland is really weird because they're the most British people in Britain, right? They're more British than the English. They love the Queen. Well, so again, it splits into two because you got the Protestants who came over from Scotland, but you've also got then you got the Irish people who want a unified Ireland. So that's why they're at war. That's why they hate each other. That's why we had years of Republicans against the Queen itself, and so there's still a lot of hatred there. But the British people there are the most British people you'll find. Everyone hangs a flag outside of their house because they want to be a part of the UK, right? And then you've got they absolutely but then you've got the Irish who fucking hate them. They want a united Ireland. Look, I support a united Ireland. It should be one country. You got the Welsh. No one really hates the Welsh, right? The Welsh don't really hate anyone. They're just kind of
the Welsh just I feel like the Welsh have just like lived on a series of promises that were never kept in the UK, and they just kind of like survived and been okay with it. But also a little disappointed. Like I feel like being Welsh is just being disappointed all the time.
There must be like a US version. Is it like Hawaii, but without the weather?
I don't think so, because I don't think Hawaii is disappointed at all. I think they really kind of like being part of the US. They're like happy about it. They're not really forgotten. I guess it'd be more like being Puerto Rico or Guam.
No, I don't think the Welsh mind being part of. I don't think they mind being a part of it.
I don't think so either. But it's kind of like the forgotten area, I feel like.
Yeah, it's the Scottish. The Scottish fucking hate us. They hate us.
Oh yeah.
They hate. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them. Like, when they had their vote for devolution, it's suddenly, we're probably better as part of the UK. But yeah, they hate us. But the gun thing, the gun thing's a funny one you should bring up because I was very anti-guns, and every time I would see a shooting in the US, I'd think this is fucking moronic. Then I kind of spent some time learning about it and understanding it. And I think there's two sides to guns in the US. There is the American side, which is I'm an American. I want to protect myself from overreach of the state. If it ever gets too far, we will set up our militia.
Right.
Blah blah blah. That's why I know about that militia, and which I do think it's a little. I can't ever see it happening, but I love the concept behind it. And people go hunting. I kind of made friends with that politician up in Wyoming, Tyler Lindholm. He's going to take me hunting.
Very nice.
Which is kind of interesting. That was kind of cool. And then there's like this handful of absolutely crazy fucking nut jobs who somehow get a gun at some point and go and shoot a bunch of people, who kind of ruin the fun for everyone else. But I've kind of come to understand that guns in the US, like, I don't think you're ever going to get rid of them. Do I think someone needs to own 25 AR-15s and bump stocks and all that crazy shit? Possibly not. Possibly
Why
not.
Well, it's their prerogative. Like, I mean, here's the thing: how many people have shot people with 15 AR-15s?
One guy
shoot
in Vegas.
people with one. Maybe. Unless you believe the conspiracies.
Oh, no, I'm not going to. Someone tried to dig that up for me the other day. But anyway, so the point being is, like, people have come back to me and they've said, well, you're anti-guns. And I say, you know what? In terms of the US, I get it now. I'm not. And I understand the freedom side of it. But if you ask me, do I want to change the laws in the UK so we suddenly have the same gun laws? Absolutely fucking not. I don't. I just don't.
Well, I think most places are very afraid of guns, which is understandable. They're super scary objects. But I think people have to understand. I mean, gun culture is inculcated in the United States, into the blood of the citizens of the United States. I mean, everybody here has a gun. Everybody. I mean, not literally everybody, but I think there's something like maybe 400 million guns in the U.S.
More than people.
So more guns than people. And, like, it's collecting guns for some is like, collecting Beanie Babies for me. They want lots of different ones. Some of them are collectors. They have guns that are 100 years old. Some of them are, just they like handguns. They like shotguns. They like an AR-15. They like other types of guns. I don't know. Maybe they like the history of the 1911. I mean, guns are. I'm a watch guy. I really like watches. Guns are like watches. They're mechanical, analog instruments that perform a function beautifully. And, I mean, people like looking at them. And in addition to that, they have other functions like, keeping your family safe. But I think most people just really love them. They're cool. They're really neat. I mean, in the way that I like watches, it's just an amazing instrument. The fact that like springs do this thing, a bullet goes flying forward and then it ejects a shell, and blah blah blah. It's just it's the neatest instrument that anyone has ever made. In the same way that like a mechanical watch is just one of the coolest things that has these tiny little gears all being run by this tiny little coiled spring that's like expanding and contracting to all in an effort to be as accurate to the second as possible. Meanwhile, we have this thing you could use, called a quartz, and you can send a vibration through it and basically have perfect time. But why would you do that when you can have a Rube Goldberg machine on your wrist? It's the same thing. It's a really neat, like, that's just Americans love guns, and there's a lot of reasons, and I don't think you can necessarily export that culture. I think that like exporting gun culture to other countries would be a little bit like how America has tried to export sort of this like manifest destiny. Like, we want Iraq to be an American style like republic. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good luck.
You can't export it because it's not. It isn't just the guns. The gun culture isn't just about guns. It's like baked in your constitution.
No, it's about fighting the British.
Yeah. So
no, I mean, it's just you can't have them. You don't understand them. No, but there is a weird sort of. I mean, America is about the principle of America, and I mean, it's interesting because like anytime you and I have gotten together, we've talked like Bitcoin stuff. So this is like a very divergent subject, but it's frankly it's one of my favorite. But the principle of America is in fact very similar to like what a lot of the Bitcoiners bring, and it's this idea of libertarianist liberty. It's the idea of the individual the individual is responsible for the individual. So it's actually interesting in regard to this coronavirus panic because we have a lack of PPEs, these personal protective equipment.
Yeah.
And in my world, I'm looking at it, and everyone's looking to the federal government and trying to blame Donald Trump for not, preparing or something like that. Meanwhile, we're what Europe wanted to be. We have 50 states. They're sovereign, each of them. They are required to sort of acquiesce to the power of the federal government, which is, the supreme authority. But the federal government is really supposed to exist only to like step in when local, authority can't do it. So, for example, the federal government might step in its role in coordinating sort of moving personal protective equipment from one state to another, right? Where one state has too many, one state needs more, and kind of, maybe mobilizing the Air Force to move that stuff. That might be the function of the federal government. But like in the process of this, you're asking yourself in a world where you believe the individual is also sovereign in the way that the state is sovereign, why didn't the nurses and the doctors have their own supplies of PPEs? Why didn't the hospitals have their own supplies of PPE? Why didn't the state have its own supply of PPE? And why does the federal government have a lax supply? But that should be the backstop to all of those other sort of those other suppliers. All of those other people who should have been responsible to themselves.
Well, you know what comes through as somebody on the outside, and someone who's visited the States as an outsider as much as anyone. Like, I've been over 100 times now, right? What stands out to me is that the whole sovereign state doesn't seem to exist as much as you probably think it does in terms of your constitution and the way it should, because there is so much overreach from the federal government right now. Well, not even just now, it just always is interfering in another business, especially under like Trump being this big fucking power hungry guy. It doesn't appear.
Do you really believe that, by the way?
But what?
That Trump is a big power hungry guy?
I mean, yeah, of course. I think it's without doubt. I think
that's interesting. I don't agree. I mean, like I have this like very interesting relationship with the Donald Trump situation, because in America, like there's this like notion of the Trumpian Nazi rise and stuff like that. I don't really care that much about Donald Trump. I wouldn't say I like him, but I do find sort of the rhetoric about him to be this sort of grave injustice that I do think threatens the fabric of our nation. I don't think that he is. I think he's probably the least power hungry president I've ever seen in my life. He doesn't seem to have any sort of understanding of like the idea of grabbing power. And in fact, if you look at this, the response in coronavirus, he's been very much about like trying not to escalate the takeover of rights by the government. And that's been very interesting to watch, because I don't think that would have been the case with anybody else.
No, there's two separate things I would put in there. So I think in some ways he is the most American president for a long time, in that he has tried to take the US out of wars, right? He isn't trying to force states to. I mean, they asked him the other day about, some of the states don't have lockdowns. Will you force them? He didn't want to do it, and I think they were all Republican states as well, like 7 of them. And I get that he does seem to follow the principles of being like an American, the Constitution sometimes. But I also think he's more desperate than anyone to win a re-election, and more desperate than anyone to point to his successes, to the point where it's so transparent when you watch his press conferences what he's trying to do, like beyond any president I've ever seen, trying to spin everything as I've done this perfectly, I'm tremendous. And I find that
I think that here's the thing. I think that like there's been some sort of lost in translation stuff here, and I think in particular there's a misunderstanding of sort of the history of Donald Trump and what he comes from. And he comes from a group of like, it's sort of a Christian, a quasi-Christian group. He was raised in a church, and the central ethos of that pastor was sort of this name it, claim it. If you say it, it will become true. And I know these people, and I don't think that you can understand Donald Trump without knowing that type of Christian. And I don't know that he would, I wouldn't say that I would call him like a strong example of like a Christian man or anything like that. I don't know. Maybe he is. But I do know that sect of Christian. And essentially what it is you just you don't say bad things because they'll happen. It's this sort of like magical thinking type of Christianity. And you know what? It grows right up out of Christian like evangelicalism. It is the secret, but this is sort of the Christian version of it, and it precedes the secret by quite a bit in terms of its adoption. It's something that comes out of I think the 50s, probably as far back as the 50s, and it's pervaded particularly like Black Christianity in America. But that is what he is. He's the easiest person in the world to get a soundbite from, because all you have to do is accuse him or is ask him if he did something badly. Right? And he will tell you he didn't. He did it perfectly, because he believes if he says that he did it perfectly, then it will turn into something he did perfectly. So, you look at the call with Ukraine. You can go ahead and criticize whatever you want with it. He will not divert from the response, I had a perfect call with Ukraine. And if you ask him about the inauguration crowd, he will not divert from the fact that he had the biggest crowd ever in the history of humanity, ever gathered in one spot ever. And it's wrong. It's objectively false. But I think that
he's
Donald
fundamentally
Trump
lying.
Maybe. I don't think that you're correct about that. I think that you believe that honesty is conveyed in true words, and I think that there is a meta-honesty to Donald Trump that maybe you're missing. And I mean, this is going back to like the Bitcoin Uncensored days. This was the entire thing. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is tell a lie. And that's just objectively true. I mean, there are times like if the media is accusing him of something that they're accusing him of something false, oftentimes he's just responding to gotchas. And he doesn't give a fuck about that. Like, someone said it to me a couple months ago, Donald Trump, like, he's regularly accused of being a bully. I don't think he's a bully, and this is someone else's thought, a friend of mine, and I think he's correct about this. I don't think of him as a bully. I think of him as a kid that was getting beat up on the playground and finally learned to stand up for himself.
Yeah, maybe. Listen, the funny thing is, like, I'm not anti-Trump, right? And I tell you, it might be like, what is it? What's the split in the US now? Is it like 60-40 favor in Trump? 50-50?
I don't know, but he's got a high favorability rating throughout this thing. Despite people thinking he failed and some not. I mean, like people seem to think he's doing a pretty good job with the coronavirus crisis.
But outside the US, he isn't. And I'm generally apolitical in that I don't mind criticizing someone if I think they deserve criticism. But I've tried to defend Trump. Trying to defend Trump here in the UK is really fucking hard. Like my brother was yelling at me at Christmas when I was defending him, and I was like, well, objectively speaking, I think he would have been a less dangerous. I say
your brother's a pussy.
He's a socialist. My brother's a socialist, and he would vote for Bernie, and he would vote for Corbyn. But I was just saying, objectively speaking, he's a less dangerous president than Hillary Clinton would have been, and he's objectively a less dangerous president than Barack Obama. And my brother was yelling at me, and then he stormed out of the room and refused to talk to me. My point I'm trying to make is that I'm happy to defend him. I've criticized Trump on Twitter. Not that I fucking matter, but I've criticized him, and people are like, I'm unfollowing you. You're anti-Trump. It's like, no, I'm not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to criticize him when I think it's fair, and I'm going to credit him when I think it's due. And one of the most interesting things, like questions I often ask, I never get it, is like, I really like to hear from Republicans when they're critical of Trump, and I really like to hear from Democrats when they credit Trump, because they are probably the most honest opinions you'll ever get. Because when a Democrat is crediting Trump, he's almost certainly in that situation done something right. And when a Republican is criticizing him, he's almost certainly in that situation done something wrong. And that's trying to get that nuance right now. It's really fucking hard.
I just don't think that that's actually even true, though, because I think that there's not a lot of nuance to Trump. He's a buffoonish adult, and he's like an autistic kid who keeps stumbling, and he has an obscenely good nose for doing the right thing in any given situation. I don't understand it. He seems to understand how the world is going to lay out in front of him. And doesn't care what people think. I mean, like a good example is the ban on travel from China. He did that very early, and everyone told him that he was xenophobic. And now there's a lot of studies that are coming out of Italy where they wanted to ban travel from China early on, but they were afraid to. The reason they didn't is because they were afraid of being accused of xenophobia. So Trump, the beauty of Trump is that he doesn't give in to any of this bullshit, and that's sort of the meta-honesty I'm talking about. He's long honesty, and the truth part, like the things he lies about, like I don't really care about. What has he lied about of any import? That's the question I have for everybody. They have these lists of lies. I mean, the news media lies all day long.
Oh yeah,
and the media has completely destroyed the institution. There is no such thing as media anymore. It's done. Like there's no news. They're just propaganda outlets. And the difference between Russia and the United States is that in Russia, you would say they're propaganda outlets and you'd get killed. In the U.S., just everybody knows it and nobody cares anymore. We're just like, we don't watch it. We cord cut. We watch YouTubers.
Yeah, well, under Russia, the state media supports the single authoritarian leader, whereas in the US, it tends to be more like you've got state media for each party.
Yeah, and it's fine. Like we all know that Fox News is the state media for the Republican Party, MSNBC, CNN, and every other outlet is a state party for the Democrats, and that's fine. Like it's totally okay. And then if you want like fair and balanced, you call your friend up and say, "What do you think about this?" And then you go through and you find like actual articles written. You find like things that are actually like fair and accurate, and you just assess it for yourself. The news
there is a
points you in a
difference.
direction and says, smell that over there.
But there is a difference. In Russia, if you were a citizen journalist and criticizing the state, you might get murdered. Whereas in the US, you can get citizen journalists that aren't going to get murdered necessarily for criticizing the state.
I mean, in the US, there's recompense if you're retaliated against by the state for that sort of thing. Like if you're talking to about the state and a cop comes and punches you in the face on video, I mean, you're going to get a lot of money. Like the beauty of America is that like there are at least still there is a way to seek redress from the courts. And that's something that America, I have confidence still, and maybe it's a misguided confidence, maybe it's misplaced, but I have confidence that our court systems are, separate. This is the beauty of the separate but equal sort of branches of government, right? The court system is separate from the executive. It is separate from the legislature. I mean, like yesterday, there was a big decision by the Supreme Court that everyone was very angry about, and it was literally a decision about the separation of the powers. That's literally what the decision was about. And that's the beauty of these courts, is that there is separation among the powers here. And as long as not all of them are corrupted, we can, we have the others to look at the other individual branches and make sure that they don't become corrupted. And if they do, there are checks and balances. It's beautiful. And it's worked so far. It might break apart at some point.
Did you listen
Maybe
to
Corona will do it.
Did you listen to Eric Weinstein on Rogan this week?
I did, yes.
So they've
actually, I was literally just listening to it before you called.
Brilliant.
I am a few minutes in. I don't really love Eric Weinstein. I'm 37 minutes and 53 seconds into it.
So, interesting. All right. So you won't be at the bit that really interested me. So this is the only podcast I've listened to on this lockdown. I mean, podcasts are down. Mine are down like 20, 30%, right? Because media habits are changing. Everyone's on Netflix watching Tiger King. But I've been running because we get our daily government-approved exercise, right? So I've been running.
Well, shout out to Hidden Forces. That's the one that's been, in my opinion, the most interesting throughout this entire meltdown.
Well, that's the right name for a podcast you want during a meltdown. Hidden Forces.
Demetrius Kafinas. He actually mentioned he's the one that engaged with you when Chris and I were on that podcast a while ago. He said it was the most interesting podcast he'd heard about Bitcoin.
Interesting.
So he listens to your show. So shout out to you, Demetrius. Thank you very much for making your content. I love it.
All right, I'm gonna reach out to Demetrius. But so two things there. You said you're not a fan of Weinstein. I wasn't. I've actually interviewed his brother about what happened up at Evergreen College. Interesting guy. And then I heard about this podcast, The Portal, and I listened to it, and I was a little bit like, I kind of struggled with it because that this whole intellectual dark web thing, it's just a bit too elitist for me. I'm a bit more like, I need the unintellectual light web, right? I need the dumb guys version. It's just a bit like, and I just felt like it was forced attempt to be super fucking smart. I ended up listening to the one with that VC guy. Who's the VC guy has the blood of virgin children injected in him?
Peter Thiel?
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh, come on, man. This is just a
the
bit.
Blood of virgin children.
So anyway, I was like, fuck that. I'm not. But bear with me.
I agree with you on that, by the way.
But I wasn't that interested in it. And then when he was on the Rogan one, I was like, ugh. And the thing is, I love Rogan, right? I think his show's fucking awesome. But I don't tend to listen to all the ones with comedians because, limited time, I prefer the ones that aren't comedians. And I saw Weinstein come up. I was like, go on, I'll check it out. And actually, I really liked this show, actually. And maybe it's because Rogan's good at probing him to go into the right areas, right? Rather, a bit like you and DeRose used to bounce off each other. He probes him and gets him to go into the right areas. And then following that, I actually went back and listened to another one of Weinstein shows again. And again, it's a bit, we would say wanky in the UK. It's a little bit wanky, but there's interesting stuff in there. But the really, really interesting bit about the interview with Weinstein and Rogan is when he talked about mainstream media. And he's like, we need to stop referring to MSN and Fox News as mainstream media. We need to call that legacy or traditional media because, Joe, you're mainstream media. You're mainstream now. And the great thing, the best thing about Rogan is he has created this channel and this podcast that can get millions, tens of millions listening, and he can say whatever the fuck he likes. He can go on and say, this trans stuff is bullshit. These transport things are bullshit. Now, you're not going to get away with that in the liberal left, but he can just go out and fucking say it. And at the same time, he can actually be all about guns and traditional American things. He can be left and he can be right, and he doesn't give a fuck. And I think in some ways that's because he's got to that point now where he knows he's so big, he's never going to run out of sponsors, so he's financially secure. So he can just say whatever the fuck he wants. Whereas all these traditional legacy media businesses, they're all worried about losing sponsors and hitting their targets. So they're fucked. They can't be honest. Right. And the smaller kind of podcast guys, I mean, actually, it kind of goes back to, we can actually tie into what Brian Hoffman was saying about this. But the smaller guys have always got to like worry about their sponsors. Like even for me, right, this year, I think at least 5 occasions people have contacted Kraken and said, why are you sponsoring him? Why are you sponsoring him? Because I've got into arguments or disagreements with people. They're trying to get Jesse to not sponsor me. And that's not all the times where people have just tagged Kraken or BlockFi said, why are you sponsoring him? Or Jesse, why are you sponsoring him? It's like, it's people actually going out of their way. There was one dude who was like on a Telegram group who basically initiated a campaign where people were tagging me all day and tagging Kraken, say, if you continue to sponsor it, we won't use your platform. And there's other times where people have written to them, like there's attacks on it. And that's only because I've got in fights and disagree with people. And that goes back to what Brian Hoffman was saying. Look, there is a risk. You know, this is my income and this is my business. And if I go on the full attack on something, if I think this is bullshit, I'm going to challenge it. I know on certain things, I risk my sponsorships. And that's a difficult thing.
Sure.
I'll do it anyway. I don't give a fuck.
Right. So, I mean, the thing with Rogan is independently wealthy. I mean, he's had a full film career. He's the spokesperson for the UFC. And then he has his podcast. And I don't know how much you know about the history of Rogan. When he started the podcast, he couldn't find sponsors. So he if you go back to his early episodes, his first and only sponsor is the Fleshlight for for 100 episodes. He's kicking the Fleshlight on every show. And, it took him a long time to become sort of this mainstream sort of guy. And he's got a history. People can go back and listen, and nobody gives any shits about the things he says. He has so many times he's dropped the N-word, and, you can't really do anything to him. He's kryptonite because he doesn't care. You're right about that. He has, I mean, he'll say it. He has fuck you money. And that's a really wonderful place to be in that atmosphere. And I think, I find Weinstein to be an insufferable prick, and the reason is because Weinstein has this belief that he is the smartest person on earth. He believes that he and his brother have come up with multiple Nobel-winning ideas. I mean, I came up with a Nobel Prize-winning idea in high school. I figured out how to synthesize graphite or graphene, and it was just a joke that I told my teacher, and it incidentally ended up being the way that graphene was actually synthesized, and the team that did it won the Nobel Prize. Okay, well, I didn't share it with them, and they came to it independently. And Weinstein has all this butthurt about many things in his life that he has done that have gone on to win Nobel Prizes or something like that, or he's the only one who came up with some equation, or he's the only one who understands how CPI or how inflation should actually be calculated or something like that. He's got all of these beliefs about himself being a super genius, and I think of my discovery of graphene in a similar way. It was me thinking through something and joking about how, I remember I posited to my science teacher that if you take Scotch tape and just peel it off a block of graphite, that's probably graphene because of the static electricity of tape. That was just a thought I had in my head. Incidentally, apparently that's how you synthesize graphene.
Dude.
Okay. But I didn't know that I had done it right. I didn't know that, and I'm sure other kids had done the same type of thing that I had. Because it's cool, taking tape and putting it on a graphite block and doing that. I'm sure millions of people did that, and it took a long time, and it took someone to sit down and actually do math and be like, oh, fuck, this is graphene, and stick it in a microscope and look at it, and actually know that that's what they were looking at. So, there are these people. I think that he has another story about a time that Brett had some idea, and some woman took his idea and actually did the actual hard work, and went and won some big prize, and maybe it was a Nobel Prize in some science, but that Brett didn't get it, and he's just filled with this sort of rage of not being recognized for his super genius constantly. And that was the same thing with the dark web, the intellectual dark web, when they named it. I said to Sean, who is on one of the guys on my show, I said, now that they've named it, they have a club They have their own hierarchy, and they're going to have to like figure out who they're going to kick out of it from time to time. And it suddenly becomes a very controversial club because that's censorship, and that's the whole thing that they're trying to fight against. So like there's all sorts of like caveats that come up with creation of a named organization when you guys are supposed to be sort of the no name, all accepting, anything is acceptable to talk about kind of group. And, there's just a list of things that, Brett Weinstein, for example, will not, or Eric Weinstein won't actually talk about. And that's fine, but that's not really in the spirit of the thing that they created in the first place.
Yeah. It's not a club I would want to be in, the intellectual dark web. It's
a dumb club.
It just sounds so fucking pompous. But I do like Eric's stuff at the moment. I've got to say, I've gone back and if you can filter through it, just forget all the bullshit. I actually filter through it, and there's interesting stuff.
He's not wrong. He's just a dick. Like, it's like Trump. Trump isn't wrong. He's just a dick. The difference is I enjoy watching Trump because, like, Trump is like, it's like watching, I don't know, like Randy Man Savage or something like that in the ring doing his thing. He's just a showman. He's wonderful to watch. It's entertaining. He's excellent at the thing he's doing. He's good at going to combat with people who are fighting with him. Trump is just a prick who thinks he's a super genius, and the difference is that he feels like he's in a position to exercise his super genius, whereas Brett has this like inferiority complex where he's just never been understood. He's never been recognized for his super geniusness. But that said, I occasionally listen to him. He's introduced some good things. Back to the podcast thing. There's a great podcast I was introduced to on the portal called The Red Scare, and I didn't mean to listen to it, but it was one of those things where I was like sitting there on YouTube and it just played the next video, and it ended up being this great interview with this young woman who does a podcast that reminds me of like the female version of Bitcoin Uncensored, where they just sit around and kind of lament the state of the world. It's fucking great.
But back to the original point, right? That this thing that actually Joe Rogan is mainstream media. Like, what defines mainstream media? It's wrong to say Fox News and MSN is mainstream media. It's just traditional. Like, the audience he's getting in and the way he can navigate the bullshit and be honest, that is mainstream now. And I think we're going to see more of that. And I think also post-coronavirus world, there's like two. There's post-lockdown, pre-vaccine, and then post-lockdown, post-vaccine. But in that world, there's going to be so much distrust of the media, so much distrust of authority, that I think it's going to be another opportunity for more citizen journalist stuff come up. And it's important to separate the two, though.
I agree.
Because like there's stuff like Rogan where he's going out and he's like being super honest and at times apolitical. Yes, he's a liberal, but he'll happily say if Trump's done something right. And then you've got this other kind of new wave of stuff coming up. Like, do you know Grey Zone?
No.
The Grey Zone. So that's Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton. So they're like anti...
Well, I know those names.
Oh, you know the names. So they're like American anti-US imperialism kind of people, but they provide a shield for the likes of Maduro and Assad. So as the like US rhetoric for Venezuela is growing right now, they're going on about, well, this is going to be US imperialism again. This will be a war against a sovereign nation with an elected leader. And it's like, well, hold on a fucking second. You can't sit there and just criticize the US and be imperialist and then provide a shield for Maduro like he's some honestly elected leader. Like, he's a fucking narco terrorist. Let's not
right.
say what he isn't. He is a dictator and narco terrorist. But they're doing the anti Fox News, right? They're taking what was that Fox News guy's? What was his name? Roger Ailes. They're doing like the anti-Roger Ailes thing. They're going, right, nuance is dead. Nuance doesn't get you an audience. Nuance doesn't make you money. So what can we do? Let's go the full fucking hate you US conspiracy. I'll live here, but let's go full hate on them and offer a kind of shielded sympathy for Assad and Maduro, which itself is utter bullshit and itself is fucking dangerous.
Well, Peter, my question for you, what is the sentiment of English people toward the media? Is there a distrust of the institution? Because I get the sense that Brits don't actually distrust media at all.
Not that much. Not like... Well, again, you've got to ask the question. You say, is there distrust? If there's so much distrust in US media, why does Fox News get such high ratings? Why does MSNBC? Why do people follow these sources?
Well, there's huge amounts of distrust, and then there's factions. I mean, there's something like 25% of people who believe that 9/11 was a great government conspiracy, and I think that's again the nature of the United States. If you have a conspiracy out there, something like 25% of people probably believe it. That's the thing. Like Twitter amplifies those voices, so I think the media here tends to peddle in conspiracy. It tends to peddle in propaganda, probably pushed out by Russian and Chinese sources. And a lot of it, people say it's sort of this clickbait world where they offer clickbaity articles and clickbaity content. I don't actually think that's necessarily what's going on, because the media has always done this sort of very bad job of figuring out exactly what it is that they should and can monetize. If it was just about clickbait stuff, then we'd have 17 Fox Newses, because Fox News tends to have a better sticky demographic. And, is everybody really, the people that watch Fox News are pretty loyal followers of it. Whereas I think, you look at Rachel Maddow's numbers, the instant the Russia conspiracy was proven false, she just tanked in the ratings. It wasn't like people were there for any other reason than they were literally thinking we had a Manchurian candidate in the White House.
I don't mind that Tucker Carlson. He's kind of interesting.
Tucker Carlson's going to be president of the United States. I mean, this is, again, a discussion I had with someone today. Tucker Carlson is literally sort of the meme of that Northeastern kid that everyone knew about, that he has enormous amounts of money. You don't really understand where it is. He can do whatever he wants for whatever amount of time because his family just has money. It's not like he has worked really hard, and he's become the king of that type of guy. I think that is a good description of Tucker. I was told that this morning, and I just thought it was so funny. And he literally wears a bow tie, and he's fucking articulate. And it's interesting. Tucker really could have been anything he wanted. He could have been pro-Trump, or he could have been anti-Trump, and he would have been probably the most reasonable anti-Trump person you've ever heard. And incidentally, he has taken sort of a middle road. He criticizes Trump when he needs to. I think that Tucker really loves America. There's a lot of stories now where Trump has become so distrustful of the news, and I think this is the thing. It's dangerous for our president to be distrustful of the news, and I don't think the news has grasped the fact that it's their fault. America is distrustful. The president is distrustful. So it took Tucker Carlson to get into his car, drive to Mar-a-Lago, and tell President Trump that this was an important thing. This virus was something important that he had to worry about. And that was when Trump really stepped into action. It's fascinating. Tucker's like Trump's Jiminy Cricket, in a sense.
I liked of all the kind of right-wing media in the US, Tucker's the one I trust the most to
he's the only smart one. He's the only smart one. Yeah, he's also the only smart leftist. He's very much a nationalist. He's a nationalist who is very pro-America, but he advocates things that people would consider left-wing, and he advocates things that people would consider right-wing. He's kind of your quintessential centrist, to be honest.
I like him. So back to the UK. So yeah, people just kind of trust the news, and it's funny. There's more hate towards the BBC outside of the UK than in the UK. Everyone outside of the UK is this is fucking state media. You've got a state media. In the UK, everyone's I think I trust the BBC. We love our state media. Well, I think people trust the BBC more than they trust any other news source. But there's such a strong, and that's not to say the BBC does not fuck up. Of course it does. But there is such a lens on them being kind of a state media that actually they do an awful lot of work to prove their integrity. They even do open sessions of criticisms have come in and how they've dealt with it. It is actually interesting. I mean, I take their stuff with a pinch of salt, as I take Sky News with a pinch of salt, as I take all news with a pinch of salt. I mean, I think the best thing you can do with news is look for the facts and ignore the opinions. Just say, what are the facts coming through here? If anything sounds a bit wild, you can kind of debunk it. But everyone here is a bit more trusting of the media, and because everyone here is a bit more trusting of the state. That's why I got into a few disagreements through this lockdown with people, because I've been kind of going on this libertarian journey, learning about libertarianism, but I've never kind of come out and said, I'm a libertarian. And the reason I haven't is that I've never got to the point where I've fully rationalized a libertarian society and in my head believing that it will function in a better way than like what we have now. Now, look, there's multiple measures. Of course, in a libertarian society, you will probably have less global wars. You won't have as many kind of these big, huge invasions where a flotilla of ships heads to Iraq to take down Baghdad. Right, I get that one, yes. And yes, objectively, you have more freedoms. But does it create a more cohesive society? And I'd never got fully there. I almost kind of like the idea of weaning yourself off the state and say what works, what doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work having a completely open and free market because you do get monopoly abuses. Okay, that's perhaps something that you need to look at. Again, I don't know. Yeah, if you don't have some form of police force, you do get warlords. And I know there's all these written, like Rothbardian explanations on the Mises Institute about what will actually happen. They are just theories, though. They are still just theories till it happens. So when this coronavirus kicked off, I was like, right, look, I don't trust the state. I don't trust my government. I'm still there. But at the same time, like right now, do I think that a no state response, if we were in a libertarian society, that this would have been a better response to coronavirus? Do I think that we would have do I think the response would have been better? Do I think less people would have died? Do I think that independent free market companies wouldn't have still made mistakes, or people still would have made bad judgment calls? Look, the WHO have come in for a lot of criticism and deserve it, right? But at the same time, without a WHO, would we have heard of it as earlier on? I don't know. And I'm not defending the WHO. I'm just saying how would the spread of information that happened in a libertarian society, and would there have been a trusted source within that would have made a bigger mistake? Would it have taken a longer time to get to the truth, and therefore the disease has spread further? I think these are all things that are fair to debate. And I said I think right now we need centralized planning. I've watched the UK response. I've watched the army and the work along with the government and build all these hospitals at a second's notice. Do I know that would happen the same in an open free market? I don't know. And actually right now I'm kind of like, back the NHS, save lives, let's like get through this shit. But in having that opinion now, I'm a fucking statist, and the statist is an insult and it's not a debate.
Well, I'm a heavy critic of libertarians. I think that the philosophy at its core is absolutely stupid and has literally no merit. It's just dumb. It doesn't acknowledge any sort of role of the state. And I mean, like a Paul Stortz in Bitcoin would say that there's a distinguishment between, modern libertarianism and maybe like the Milton Friedman libertarianism. And I can acknowledge that, but like I'm attacking modern libertarianism. It's this stupid anarchic belief that the individual can exist in a world filled with externalities, and that you yourself can manage those externalities with absolutely no issue. I have these weird sort of arguments with libertarians. I mean, in this case with like COVID, you'd be asking, well, in a libertarian society, why can't I participate in a wet market where we eat pangolins and bats? Why not? It's my prerogative. And then the libertarians would say, well, by doing that, you're hurting me, and that goes against the, what do they call it? The NAP principle. Yeah. The non-aggression principle. And I'm like, well, maybe, but you wouldn't know. You wouldn't have a coordinated understanding. You wouldn't have the scientists trying to figure out necessarily where this thing came from. Or maybe you would, but what would you do? Like, you're going to go to China and tell them to stop having wet markets? You're going to like go stop that practice? And the other thing is, like, libertarians, they end up in this weird world. The world they envision is one filled with like these Romanesque leaders of factional armies that are just roving the land. And all libertarians view themselves as people who have emerged from an economic collapse, who are now the wealthy elites because they hoarded gold, and so they can afford to pay armies and feed armies of people to defend their shit. And it's so stupid. It's so dumb.
So I guess you're not a fan of the citadels.
What is that? Is that the like those locations that you go and live in a libertarian like
compound? Utopia? Sometimes
I'm okay. I was raised on a commune. I don't have I think what's cool about a free society like America is that you can live in enclaves of whatever you want. So if you like communism, let the government do its thing and go live in a communist enclave. Share everything. That's fine. If you love libertarianism, go live in a libertarian enclave where you all practice the nap and kick people out who don't. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. I think if you want to live a certain way or by certain principles, I mean, we have the pork fest every year that you can go and exchange your weird gold ingots for dollars, and that's totally fine. I think that's a really cool little thing, but it's just a bunch of people LARPing. When it comes down to it, you need government for certain externality management. I mean, a good example is market downturns. You need government to be managing that. Libertarians hate central banks. It's cute. I always say this to everybody: is it more free for the government to give you a denominated amount of fiat, which you have the freedom to then buy gold with and hoard gold and keep your money in gold? Or is it more free for the government to hoard gold and give you a thing that represents the gold that they're holding? Which one's more free? Because I think the fiat is actually more free, and libertarians have a real hard time with that because they want their dollar backed in gold. And if you actually look at the history of gold, that's actually pretty common. There's a great book called The One Nation Under Gold, and it sort of takes you through the history of this. And one of the things it talks about is the fact that basically all of the lobbying about what metal was going to be backing the currency was done by people who held either silver or gold, right? So if you held silver, you wanted the United States to hoard all the silver, and if you held gold, you wanted the United States to hoard all the gold. And so it was like these sort of these self-interested parties that were begging for a backed dollar, and the backed dollar doesn't work in the first place. And if you really want a dollar backed in gold, that's totally fine. Go buy gold. You can hold the physical gold, or if you really want a dollar backed in gold, go buy. If you want the note that says that your dollar is backed in gold, go buy a IAU as an ETF. You can do that. The beautiful thing about American markets is that you have the freedom to hold whatever kind of money you want. And I think libertarians haven't quite grasped the fact that they can hold any kind of money in municipal debt or in debt from companies, because literally what money comes down to is an IOU. It's someone who creates a debt initially. In this case, the United States sells debt, right? Someone buys the debt from the United States, and then from that purchase, we create these little certificates that say this is a debt that somebody bought so that we could give you this fiat, and with that you can do whatever you want. And that's the beauty of a free society. Go hold your money in gold. And libertarians haven't really grasped the concept of what freedom really means. They are allowed to hold gold. If they really want gold backing, go hold gold.
Yeah, but it's more than that.
The state. But it's not, though. All of their complaints tend to be these complaints about things they don't actually suffer from. Like most libertarians, they'll talk about how inflation is a huge problem. My question to all of them is, how much cash do you carry in your bank account? And all of them say, well, why would I carry cash in my bank account? I was like, well, where do you put it? Well, I buy gold with it, and I buy stocks. I'm like, okay, so you don't even suffer from these inflationary pressures.
Yeah, but you're just talking about the economic side of things. Actually, there's a lot of stuff on the libertarian side where they talk about the kind of evil behavior of the state, and I think a lot of it's true. I disagree with all these fucking wars. I
agree that the state has a propensity towards leaning to tyranny, and again, you want to understand. Again, that is the American principle. America was founded on those values. We left your country because we accused your king of tyranny, right? We left because of tyrannical pressures or things that we perceived to be tyrannical pressures. We pithily stated that concern as taxation without representation, right? We didn't get to vote somebody in. We weren't represented in Parliament. Therefore, we had to leave because we were being taxed. So we didn't get any say in that tax. It was just this idea of taxation, which libertarians hate, being essentially, in the American ethos, sort of okay if you are in fact a party to the negotiations of that collective bargain, right? So we send somebody to Washington, D.C. to collectively bargain for us. And, I have issues with the way the construction of our government exists as it is today. I have issues with state overreach, but I think that there's nuance to those discussions that libertarians can't actually have because their principles are articulated in these 75-page manuals that they have, like Locke's Leviathan or something like that, where they read from them, they quote from them, and they don't have any sort of nuance that they take away from those books. And those are important books to read, but they aren't, they're written in the 1800s. Economics, for example, is a very new science. Read Adam Smith, but then also read, Keynes. Also read Hayek. Also read, everybody. You can go ahead and read von Mises if you want. Those 4 million-page books, that's okay. That's a different kind of libertarian. I generally partition libertarians nowadays into 75-page readers and von Mises, 1,000-page book readers. But, to me, there's actually nuance in the discussions about the powers of the state and the overreaching powers of the state and the function of the state that libertarians just don't have access to because they are obsessed with these sort of unnuanced, pithy arguments rather than the deeper arguments about what it is that they're actually concerned about. Napp is stupid. Don't tell me that there's a principle, this sort of Nash equilibrium optimization where you say I'm just not going to ever hurt anybody unless they hurt me first, and then I can hurt them with equal force or whatever the hell it is. And then you get down to it and you start talking about what is harm. Were you harmed when your neighbor, I don't know, did X, stepped on your grass? Oh yeah, I'd shoot him. Okay, go fuck yourself. I don't know how to talk to you about this sort of unnuanced paradigm that you're forcing me into discussing. Napp might work in an enclave where everyone agrees to live by that way. You know what it doesn't work in? It doesn't work in a world where your aggressor has nuclear weapons and is China and has trillions of dollars that they can spend on taking your land away from you. It doesn't work in that world because the most logical thing for China to do is just violate Napp.
Well, the thing is, that was one of the things I've come to with Napp is that Napp works if everyone agrees to follow Napp and the principle Napp are all agreed. But then I got into one discussion with a guy. I did say, because I think the nuance is important. I said, what happens if someone breaks Napp? What if someone just goes and kills a couple of people? And he was like, well, he gets arrested. I was like, well, who arrests him? He's like,
by whom?
The private police force. But I said, what if there isn't one? He said, well, the free market will create one. I was like, okay. So how does this police force come to be? He said, well, the free market will decide that we need a police force and then it will merge. I was like, okay, all right, cool. I agree with that. Okay, so this guy's, who's going to pay for this guy's prison keep? He's like, well, no, they charge him for it. And I was like, well, what if he refuses to pay? He was like, well,
then be arrested again.
Yeah. And I was like, we went round and round in circles, and it's I don't like the police force. I certainly think the US the police force is much worse than the UK. I don't like it, but I've never seen a good rational version. And also, there's a really good article on the Libertarian Institute saying, look, if you had a big red button to turn us into a libertarian society, it would be dangerous to press it. And I had just my view on libertarianism is my same view on socialism, which is my same view on conservatism, is that there's definitely stuff I like in each and every area, right? I like the idea of freer markets. I do. I think there are too many regulations. I like a smaller state. I think that's a good idea. I really do. I like the idea of a social safety net that protects the most vulnerable in society. I like the fact that in the UK, that if you build if you construct a public space, it has to be accessible for people in a wheelchair. It has to be done. I like that. I like the fact that right now, that during this lockdown, there is a government agency that is trying to help people who are victims of abuse. I like that exists. I like the social safety act. I like conservative ideas about allowing people to educate their children how they want. I think there's interesting stuff in each one. I think when you go down the rabbit hole of being fully tied to one ideology, then you don't accept the reality of the life we're living in. You're not accepting the most important part is that people are different.
Well, I was going to say a libertarian society is in itself a violation of Napp because it forces libertarian ideals onto people who want to live in a communist society. It forces ideals of libertarianism. I mean, this idea of maximum freedom is unique. It's very American. It's specifically American. Maximum freedom is incredible. And I support this sort of idea of maximum freedom. And what I think libertarians fail to realize is that maximum freedom requires guardrails. And we have to agree on who is allowed to exercise force within those guardrails. And so there's sort of this idea, I mean, are you familiar with like Max Weber?
No.
Max Weber is this old sociologist, 19th century, I think, sociologist, and he has an entire paper on what a government is. And essentially what he says is the government is the entity that is justified in using force. We all agree that they're the ones that are justified in using force, right? So that's the government. Maybe sometimes the government is the mafia, right? Maduro's a good example of something like that, right? Like you have this sort of despotic regime that says we are the ones that are the only people that are allowed to use force. Well, that's a very, very interesting sort of understanding of what government is. And again, in the United States, what's amazing is that we have this entity, it's the state or the federal government, that is the one that's allowed to use force. And within that, they provide guardrails and guide rails. They provide guardrails for individuals to sovereignly exercise that same right. So in a sense, you are self-governed, but you're self-governed within the guardrails of the state, which then says that you are allowed to self-govern to this extent. And beyond that extent is not allowed. And the beauty of it is that it removes the need for things like vigilante justice, right? Like if you think about it, there are some really perfectly reasonable responses to finding someone doing something evil, right? I mean, if you walk into a house and you find a guy raping a little child, I'm okay with everybody getting together and hanging that guy by a tree and burning him. That's fine. Okay, we're all okay with that. You know what though? In a state apparatus, you remove the need for vigilante justice, and now you can call the police. And the government has a set of punishments that they can exercise on that person, and they can create order through this process. And I think that's a better system of justice than this notion of the idea of vigilante justice. While I think that there could be a world in which that is something that you need, like if your, for example, state isn't a cohesive state, we live in a world where we don't need to exercise that individual freedom to run down the miry sort of mucky world of vigilante justice, because we have a state that is cohesive and capable of doling out justice to people that deserve it, even in that case. In that evil, disgusting, terrible case. And that's a wonderful world to live in. Libertarians like the idea, I feel like, of the world where you disaggregate government to the point where vigilante justice is the norm. And maybe they would like to say the police force thing would happen, but the first thing that has to happen is vigilante justice before the market realizes that maybe you want a police force. You need then to have the establishment of courts. The beauty of a state is that it can establish those things by fiat. And it can say, hey, we have a need for a police force. Let's build one. We have a need for a court. Let's build one. And sure, the government sucks at efficiency. It's not great at that. I've heard the analogy from libertarians. The state educates your kids. It's like McDonald's educating your kids. Why would McDonald's be good at that? They're not educators. That's not their primary function. The government's primary function is not education. Okay, I mean, maybe there's some really good arguments there about things the government really shouldn't be doing. Maybe the government shouldn't be educating, but maybe it should be, right?
But you have an opt-out.
I don't know all the answers. So yeah, you can opt out. In America, we have a public-private system. And the beauty is that people being uneducated is an externality. It's a huge externality. We don't want to live in a world where people are uneducated. You know what else is an externality that we as individuals, sovereign individuals, need to govern is the fact that the government can sometimes become an arm of propaganda. And I think that that's what a lot of people are very worried about, is that government is teaching kids things that we don't necessarily want them to teach. You know what? In America, you can fucking homeschool your own goddamn kid. So
no, it's not against the law.
Homeschooling, it's not only against the law. Millions of people do it. You can you can propagandize your own child. It's amazing.
See, this is where I got into some disagreements recently because I think this COVID-19 thing, is so many interesting like sub discussions around it, like the post-coronavirus world, the current coronavirus world. There's so much information, misinformation, arguments, but if you have a large Bitcoin following on Twitter, there is definitely a bias in the opinions towards how what's currently happening is the perfect example of an infringement on your freedoms. I can't leave my house because the state will arrest me. But there is a real scary reality in that we do have a lot of people dying. Like within the next couple of days, the US is going to have the largest number of deaths, and it's going to become, essentially the epicenter for this now. And we don't know 100%. Nobody knows 100% whether or not the lockdowns make a difference. My assumption is they do, but we don't know how much. We don't know how much of the population is infected. So we have this kind of choice where people are debating, well, I want my absolute freedom. Okay, for you to have your absolute freedom, it's mostly likely going to lead to more people dying. It most likely is. And that's a really interesting area of discussion because it's so tied to. I did a show with Andreas where the question was: is coronavirus a test of your personal identity? Because there are people out there whose personal identity is so tied to the ultimate freedom away from the state, no state, libertarians, anarcho-capitalists. It is impossible now for any of them to turn around and admit, do you know what? A lockdown might be a good idea. Because if they admit the lockdown is a good idea, it collapses their entire identity, so they can't do it, and therefore you can't even get into the nuance of the debate. I got Scott Horton on and we talked about it, and he said, look, in extreme scenarios, we can accept certain things for the state, but we have to ensure they retract from their powers, blah blah blah. But you can't get into the nuance of a debate where someone's identity is tied to no government, when actually one of the solutions, one of the things you can put on this table is a lockdown appropriate right now?
You're missing a word there too, though. Like, it's not just a lockdown, right? Because you can lock yourself in your house, right? Anybody can do that. And Bruce Fenton was on Twitter screaming and raving about this thing. I more quietly prepared. I actually saw this virus as kind of the big one. I was telling all of my family, okay, you need to go to the store, prepare. You need to get your supplies. Make sure that your fridge is full, and make sure you have at least a month or two's worth of food. I don't know what's going to happen to supply chains, and I'm glad that I did that because now now I'm prepared and they're prepared, and the rest of the world is freaking out, right? But the thing you're missing here is that the response needs to be a coordinated lockdown, and I don't know how else you would coordinate the lockdown. If it wasn't a coordinated lockdown, I'd be in my house for 8 months as outside would be seeing terrible death, and I would just hope that I picked the right time to come out.
Yeah, it's a really tough area to debate. Really tough area to debate, because if you are one of those people, your kind of ultimate view is that I want complete freedom to do what I want. The government shouldn't be able to tell me to do anything. To agree with some coordinated lockdown is to agree with the state. Now, I'm sure there's some libertarian argument about how people will coordinate themselves for some kind of lockdown. I know some people will only respond to threat. I know it because what we have, even now, there was yesterday in London, 30 guys got together for a game of cricket. Right in the middle of a nationwide lockdown that everyone is aware that you're meant to be social distancing, you're not meant to be near each other. 30 guys got together and said, fuck it, let's have a game of cricket. Now, look, I like the idea of them exercising their freedom and saying, we're going to play this game of cricket. But at the same time, if one of them has COVID-19 and he spreads it to other guys and they get sick and they go to a hospital, on the way, in the 2 weeks before they get sick, they risk going to Tesco's and Sainsbury's, buying some grocery, picking up an apple and spreading the disease to a shop worker. They risk going to the hospital and making health workers sick. And we've seen it in Italy, over 100 health workers have died. In the UK, I think we're approaching 10 health workers. We've had 15 people, transport workers, the bus drivers, the train drivers, they're dying. This disease is no fucking joke. It might not be Spanish flu levels, but it's no fucking joke. Every day the numbers come in. Yesterday it was 950 people, I think, in the UK. And they said
I think it might
43 of
actually-
those. Sorry, they said 43 of those
No, you're
were with known unknown conditions. There was a 23-year-old. Like, this isn't just a flu. I mean, anyone spouting that now is a fucking idiot. So we are dealing with this issue. It's like, what is the sacrifice? And actually, the sacrifice is, look, if I want my freedom, I want to accept that there will be a wider spread and other people are going to die. But the reality is the people saying this, there's no health workers saying this. The people saying this are the people who can just stay in their home and order their online shopping and lock themselves down. The people not saying this are the bus drivers, the supermarket workers, the medical staff, because they're the ones seeing people die, or they're the ones risking death going to work every day. So I think you have to be able to have the debate about the lockdown and whether it's valid and what are the reasons you might want to have it and how it should be exercised. If you're shutting down the debate by saying, well, it removes my freedom, you're moving any intellectual honesty in discussing what ultimately leads to more people just fucking dying.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how the apparatus of the lockdown can become a very scary precedent for people, given how government has moved to sort of re-exercise its power over and over again. I mean, like we see it with 9/11 and the repassing of the Patriot Act every couple of years. They don't seem to want to give that up, even though that the American people, I think as a whole, think it's a very bad piece of legislation. But at the same time, we do want the government to protect us, right? So there's this kind of dual belief that, the government needs tools to protect us, but we don't like the tools, but we also don't really have any better ideas, right? And I do think there's a danger in government realizing that it can declare emergencies and just lock everyone in their houses for a little while until they declare the emergency is done. And I see the grave danger in that. And I think that we should all recognize that there is a grave danger in all of this becoming normal. And I think I'm back to like sort of the Weberian concept of routinization, where you have this sort of like, this normative action that occurs, or this action that's non-normative and is maybe efficacious, right, in some way. In this case, it might be good at staving off a disease, right, killing a pandemic. But as we move forward, eventually this just becomes protocol for emergencies of some sort, right? And 20 years from now, 30 years from now, no one remembers why we started doing it, but we just all know instinctively that the thing we do when there's an emergency is we go into our house and lock ourselves in our home and ruin the economy for 30 days. And I fear that sort of routinization. I fear that sort of forgetfulness of where we were a month ago as Americans, walking around and slapping each other's butts and sitting next to each other in stadiums, 2.5 feet away from a person that we don't know, and close enough to smell each other's farts. Like that's the kind of world that we all like, that we want to be in, and I don't want to lose that. And I do fear that this will routinize the sort of act of turning emergency declarations into these objects of jailing people in their own homes, right? I fear that. But at the same time, I don't know what else you would do in this case, and I think it requires people like me who understand that is a risk to watch out for it and make sure that doesn't happen. And again, in America, the beauty of it is that we have guns. So if the government decides to get out of line, there is always the nuclear option that America has built in constitutionally for the citizens to rise up and kill the tyranny. And I think that is a means to prevent the government from acting in a way that will cause that. And maybe, this sort of Overton window concept where you expand, people's willingness to maybe do things that wouldn't have been acceptable 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Maybe this increases that. But there's a world in which the government pushes too far. I don't know that we're there. Well, but the beauty of America is that we have redress.
But that's the complexity of the problem, because the arguments on both sides are valid. There is a sound argument to say to protect lives with a pandemic where we don't really know the true nature of how fast it spreads and how many people it's going to kill. We just don't know. Nobody can actually say, well, if we did nothing, X number of people will die. Nobody can say that. Nobody knows if it's 2.2 million or 500,000. They don't know that. And so there is a very sound argument to say, look, is it best for the protection of life and the protection of people that we have some form of lockdown? And that's a fair debate. And then the other side of the argument is the fear of overreach of the state and these being new powers. And, all right, Thursday we've got a lockdown. Yeah, and we are being used to it. I think the arguments are sound on both sides. My thing is, I'm trying to say, is like, how do you navigate the nuance of that? And also, as somebody has a Bitcoin podcast, how do you navigate the nuance of that without committing career suicide? Because strictly speaking, with the more radical side of Bitcoin, strictly speaking, I should be, this is bullshit, this is anti-state, I should do what I want. At the same time, I don't live in a Bitcoin world. My Bitcoin world is Twitter and my podcast. I then go out into my normal life, which is all my friends who will vote left or right, who are doctors, who are nurses, who are shop workers, who are IT guys, and then I sit and talk to them. There's no debate around that. They're like, this is fucked up. Everyone needs to stay at home. And like trying to navigate all this nuance is very complicated. But treating it as black and white, I think, is dishonest to everyone. And it doesn't accept there are different people with different opinions and views. I mean, I've got to the point where it's like, look, you can't even stop the lockdown. It's not like anyone can stop this. It's happening. So what do we deal with what's in front of us? And I think the most important thing is to keep a very close eye on the state. And actually, this is something we're also pretty good in the UK with the media. The media has been providing a lot of pressure onto the government to say, look, we've got police in Derbyshire using drones. We've got somebody going for a walk in the countryside on their own and they're being fined. This is a bit much. So we do have some pressure from the media. But this is a real fucking test right now of what is best for people, and it's a really complicated area. And trying to debate it as someone with a Bitcoin podcast adds extra pressures. It almost goes back to again to what Brian's saying. There's two kinds of pressures, right? There's the pressures of the economics of running the business, and then there's the pressures of your audience. And sometimes you just got to say, fuck it. This is what I think. If I lose an audience, so be it. And if I lose a sponsor, so be it. But you've got to stay fucking honest.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I have a very sort of strong sense of the goals of my life, and I'm a Christian, and I tend to view very much one's purpose as being very much outside of the notion of the state. And there's, that for me is a comforting feeling, right? Like I don't necessarily view myself as obligated to live within the paradigm, right? Like, so for example, if the United States becomes corrupt and terrible, well, the United States is the earthly authority that I answer to, and I will live within it. But I also have a set of rules that I believe very strongly in living by that are outside of the state's rules, right? And if they be, and those are things like justice and love and charity and stuff like that, right? And if the state begins violating those things, then I myself stop caring about what the state does. And if I go to prison for violating those things, but I live in the way that I am called to live in my faith, then I very much view that as sort of like fulfilling the meaning of life, right? And so like for me, the idea of like having a career and sponsors is a little bit anathema, because that for me has never been like sort of the purpose of anything that I've ever done or wanted to do. Bitcoin Uncensored was mostly fart jokes and stuff, but it was the goal of it, if you listen to it, is to convey truth at all costs. And for me, again, that goes back to sort of my understanding of what it means to be a person of faith. And real simple, I think like biblically the Bible says, seek and you will find. I think that is a directive for Christians to look for truth in all things at all costs. And the idea of you will find is you will find me in Christ, who is truth. Okay, so if that's the case, then I believe that the purpose of life, at least for someone of faith, and if the faith is correct, then this is a correct statement, is to seek truth at all costs. And if truth leads you away from, God or whatever it is, then that's truth. And if it leads you towards him, then that's truth.
Sounds like you're, sorry to interrupt, it sounds like you're describing journalism, what journalism should be.
But this is my entire point, is like journalism or all things, like these are, the reason I think in like a Judeo-Christian framework, a lot of like what works in America works is because this notion of like seeking absolute truth matters. So when you have a deconstructive environment wherein the world is kind of like in this post-Platonic modernist sort of like post-truth world, you have a lot of issues, because this idea of looking for truth is sort of meaningless, right? You can't actually find truth if it doesn't exist. So you have these like deconstructionists now that are trying to like say that truth doesn't exist. Well, if that's the case, you've literally ruined sort of the basis of American society, because American society is rooted in these principles of searching for absolute truth. And again, whether the principles, the Christian principles themselves, and this is why I like Weber a lot for a lot of reasons, but Weber is sort of one of the first people to kind of look at someone. He is in his book Spirit of Capitalism. He looks at Benjamin Franklin as his kind of Ubermensch, and he uses him as the ideal. He says, look, back in the day, Christians sort of had this idea that they were blessed. And if they were blessed, it would be shown in the fact that they were successful. Well, in order to be successful, you had to work hard. And the manifestation of working hard is success, right? Mm-hmm. So what you have is you have this like work ethic that is imbued in Christians and particularly Dutch Christians who work hard in order to show the world that, in order to prove that they are blessed, and they thus end up becoming very entrepreneurial. They develop things like markets, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then you have a world in which America rises up, and you have a lot of Christians in that world, but you also have people that act exactly like the Christians act, and he uses Benjamin Franklin as an example. Benjamin Franklin at this point isn't working for God. He's working for the mere fact that work is something that he views as a good. So that word routinization earlier, the idea is that work, the ethic of work, has been routinized in such a way that you no longer need God, right? And you have that combined with like sort of these Nietzsche declarations that God is dead. That's what that comes out of, is the idea that you don't necessarily need to have God in your ethos, in your understanding of the world, in order to exercise the things that would be the Judeo-Christian world. But when you start removing things like truth, which are the basis of the conception, the basis of someone like Benjamin Franklin's life, he lived to look for truth. Incidentally, as he did that, he didn't become closer to God. He whored and did whatever he wanted to do, and there's he found an awful lot of truth. Right? He sought truth and he found a lot of it. And I think that like in my life, that's always been the goal. I don't remember exactly how that. So to your question about the career, like for me, like I've never cared about the career stuff. I think when we do this stuff, I think my goal has always been what is true. And if it's not true, I'm not that interested in it. If it's not an exploration of what is true, I'm not that interested in it. And, you can get that in a lot of ways. And it goes back to that question about, is Donald Trump being honest or is he not? Well, maybe. And truth doesn't always look like what you think it looks like. It's not just about like words, right? Someone can say that they believe very strongly in charity, but if they never do any charity, they don't believe strongly in charity. It's just like, they can say they believe in it. Whereas if someone says, I love charity, or I hate charity, right? Maybe that's a Donald Trump phrase. I hate charity, but he does a lot of charity. Then he really does actually believe in charity. So it doesn't matter necessarily the words you use to say things in terms of like the truth, the truthiness of your life and like the closeness that you are to truth. And that's just the reality, I think, of the world, is that like if you're seeking truth, you can in fact find quite a lot of it just by looking very hard for it, asking hard questions, being honest about your search for it. And insofar as like you're building a career on like political stuff, like, you can play that game. I don't like playing that game because it just doesn't, like, I don't think politics are great revealers of truth. I think that it's sort of politics ends up becoming like a series of macros where like you are in politics and you have to say certain things in order to please certain people.
Yeah, but I don't do it. That's the thing. I do end up pissing people off all the time. And look, it was good. It was good at the start. It was good for profile. I didn't do it to get profile. I just said what I think, and I still say what I think, and it every time gets me into a world of shit. Like even just this building a Bitcoin podcast and then saying you believe the state can do some things that would be better than in a free anarcho-capitalist society, as a risk. I'll say it, I don't give a fuck, but it comes with a lot of pressures. It comes with a lot of criticism, fucking trolls going, "Oh, he's just a fucking statist," over and over again. Whereas what I am trying to do is I'm trying not to blindly follow a certain, let's say it's a subgroup of Bitcoin, because there are multiple Bitcoiners. There are statist Bitcoiners, there are capitalist Bitcoiners, there are anarcho-capitalist Bitcoiners, there are libertarian, there's all types of Bitcoiners, right? But there is a certain grouping which is based on this everything anti-state, the state is bad, free money, Bitcoin standard, blah, blah, blah. And I don't agree with it. And that's my truth. My truth is right now is that I like a lot of the ideas behind Bitcoin. I like a lot of the ideas behind libertarianism. I like the goal for freedom. I like the ideas of free speech, because we don't have that in the UK. I like the idea of freer markets. But right now, right in this pandemic, if I am being 100% honest, I think there are certain things that the state will do better centrally. And I think there are certain things that maybe in a free market would be done better. Maybe the sourcing and manufacture of PPE in a free market would have been better. Maybe there would have been less stockpiling. Maybe the government does more stockpiling. Who knows? I think you have to debate these points honestly and say, let's look at each one of these issues and which would the state have done better and which would have been better in a free market. And I don't think you can say every single fucking scenario would have been better in a free market. I think that's fundamentally dishonest.
What I like about what's happened with COVID, and this is both a tragedy and an interesting thing from like a sociological perspective, perhaps, but COVID is ripping through all sorts of nations with all sorts of different kinds of designs for like medical systems or, constructions of states, like European Union, for example, right? That as juxtaposed with like the United States of America. So, how cohesive is the European Union when they kind of let Italy out to dry, right? Whereas in America, we don't leave Utah or Idaho out to dry. We work with them no matter what. And that's just the way the U.S. works. It's a very different kind of cohesion that we have here among the states, federally. It's I don't know if it's a culture issue or what the deal is, but it's very different than the European Union, which is sort of this conglomeration of individual sovereign nations, right? And each of them have different kind of health systems. Like, I think Italy's is pretty socialist, kind of what we would call socialist healthcare. And each of them are faring differently in different ways. And I think what's going to be interesting at the end of this is to analyze how particularly America comes out of it, because the way that America is coming out of it is basically taking this sort of War Powers Act, this idea that we have all of this productive capacity and this intellect that we can sort of turn and pivot on a dime and say, hey, you were a car maker, but this week you're going to be making masks out of cotton for healthcare workers, and you're going to be pumping out as many as you can, and this other company over here is going to help you retool, right? I think that that's going to be the great savior of the United States when all of this is said and done. And I think that is going to be very interesting because it's sort of this hybrid capitalist / government mandated use of the capitalist spirit that is going to save us. And if that works, that'll be really fucking interesting when all is said and done. Because no other nation has that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's on a scale, right? I mean, the UK has the ability to do certain things, not to the extent, we don't have executive powers to go and order companies to change the way they're working, but we have had companies just do it anyway. We've had Dyson start making ventilators. It's happened. We've had the ability for the government just to go and build in 9 days. They built a new hospital in central London, and they're planning 13 more. I interviewed a lady who's a health communicator out in Africa, and we're talking about Kenya. Kenya has 155 ICU beds for a population of 50 million. I think we have something like 3,500 in the UK for a population of 60 million. But we can quickly spin up, a couple of thousand more. We can quickly call on all previous health workers to come out of retirement.
Even dentists, I hear.
Yeah, anyone can come out. Like, if my mum was still alive, she would have got on a first plane back here and she would be nursing, and she'd have risked her life and just fucking done it. We have that. Kenya doesn't have that. Kenya can't suddenly build a hospital in 9 days. I mean, perhaps it can, but I doubt it. It certainly can't just go and build 13. Also, when Kenya goes into a lockdown, You're locking down people who don't have jobs, who hustle every day just to survive. Who's going to provide them with food? Where's the food going to come from? They cannot do that to the extent that other nations can. And that's a really interesting thing to watch. And again, if you want to compare it to like a libertarian society, how would a libertarian society really have functioned through this? Now, if a libertarian writes the thesis on how that would have happened, of course, it would have been perfect. But you can't intellectually, honestly, have a libertarian write that. You have to debate the points. One of the things is, I think, that the state can do better than, say, a free market is the speed of response. And the speed of response with something like this is super important. Yes, in a free market, companies could just suddenly say, there's an economic opportunity here. Let's start creating masks. Okay, well, you need to get the resources and you need to get the parts. You need to get the staff. Where you're going to get them. But do you have limited finance to do that? Whereas a government can just go, let's print a bunch of money. Right, you fucking make this. I think it's fair to debate that. And I think we have to be honest to debate that. And if you can honestly debate that, then I think you can actually dismantle the parts of the state which are a waste. You can actually look at the state and go, right, look, tax is high, there is overreach. Which of the bits can we dismantle? Which are the bits that are best run by the state, which aren't? Like, head towards that minarchist idea. And I don't know how big, I know there's definitions of a minarchist society, but perhaps there's a minimal government. Like, perhaps there's one we can strive towards, and we can do that by learning about what's happened here.
Well, if that's interesting to you, what's been very interesting to me has been the sort of unveiling of the power of the supply chain.
Yeah.
And how, I think this is what's amazing in America. We have rail and road and all these, ways in which food gets from one place to another. And I think it's been amazing to watch grocery stores continue to function throughout this. Who knows how long that's going to last? I hope they continue to. But grocery stores, the Postal Service, UPS, FedEx, DHL, the supply chain, at least in the United States, has been rock solid, incredible. Sure, stores are out of toilet paper from time to time, but we have this incredible supply chain that I am in awe of. I am just sitting here pissing myself watching this thing chug along in spite of hardship. Like, all of the sourcing of things, all of that stuff. I'm sure there's people scrambling in office buildings making sure that there's chicken in the grocery store. I'm sure that that's happening, but I'm not doing it. I don't have to do it. And I'm amazed. I'm amazed by that. And I'm amazed at the robustness of it. And to me, that's a small miracle. I can't believe how good we are at inventory management. I can't believe how good we are at diverting resources and growing food and moving food and making sure that everybody is fed. And, it's just, to me, the entire thing's incredible.
Next up, I talked to Junseth about a whole bunch of other things, loads and loads of things. But before that, I do have a message from my amazing sponsors. So firstly, let's talk about the best crypto exchange out there, the mighty, mighty Kraken. How you doing out there? Are you trading? Are you buying these dips? Are you buying your Bitcoin? I am. I'm increasing my Bitcoin holding. I've gone up by 10% in the last couple of weeks. I've decided, after seeing the Crypto Haze tweet, I'm all in, motherfuckers. Like, I am in with Bitcoin. I am worried about this printing money. I know I need to hedge against the market. So I am all in Bitcoin. And the only exchange I use is Kraken. And there's a few reasons why. Firstly, it is the most secure crypto exchange out there, bar none, unquestionable. They also have the best customer service out there. They will answer any request from anyone to help you get through what you need. They've got such an amazing suite of services. Whether you're just starting out and you're at Kraken.com buying your first Bitcoin, or you're one of those whales and you've got a shitload you need to buy and you want to use the OTC markets, they also have a beautiful mobile first app. So whatever you're doing, if you're sat on Netflix and you're watching Tiger King, you're like, shit, I want to buy some more Bitcoin. If you're out on your government approved walk and you're thinking, yeah, time to Bitcoin, you can do it with Kraken Pro. They're amazing mobile first app. Look, there is no better place to buy Bitcoin. If you want to find out more, head over to Kraken.com or download the app, which is available for the iPhone and Android. Just search for Kraken Pro, which is KrakenPro. Also, we have the amazing BlockFi, the future of Bitcoin and financial services. I've got an interview coming up. I recorded with Zach and Flory last week. That's going to be out next week. I put all the difficult questions that people put to me about having them as a sponsor right at them. Everything from market volatility, black swan events, and coin joins. They answer everything. It's all there. If you want to hear the answers to these questions, check into that next week. Now listen, they've sponsored me for 18 months, but I've also been a customer. Coming up to a year now, I'm a customer of their interest accounts. I get my interest in Bitcoin and monthly. I love it. But they also do have their crypto-backed loans, which allows you to access liquidity without selling by using your crypto as collateral. You can unlock up to 50% of the value of your assets in USD. So whether you want a loan or an interest account, I do recommend you do your own research. Then head over to blockfi.com, which is blockfi.com. I think we're quite early on in understanding the impact on the supply chain, because I think the cracks will start to appear a little bit later down the line. So a couple of things that were on my mind. Do you know the whole Milton Friedman thing about no one knows how to make a pencil, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about that, I'd heard that before, but I'd only heard it to the extent where someone explained there's not a single person. I'm actually reading the Pantera Capital blog because that's where it came from. I just interviewed Dan Moorhead, so we covered it. And it says there's not a single person in the world who can make this pencil. Remarkable statement. Not at all. The wood from it, which is made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. Yeah, and I've heard about that. And where does the lead come from? Where does the rubber come from? But actually, what I'd never heard is the other bit is like, where does the saw come from to cut down that tree? It comes from, and all the other bits of the supply chain that lead up to the manufacture of the components. So UPS is still going, but how long do their vans last for? When do the vans start breaking down? When they need to renew them? We have a car industry now that's been paused. Or the farms rely on equipment and tractors and what happens to the machinery during that process? So do we have to keep the people running? We talk about key workers. Is farm machinery a key worker? Because if a farm can't produce the goods because the farm machinery is broken down, what happens to there in the supply chain? And then the thing that really fucking worries me, you've got all these islands around the world which are holiday destinations that are all closed down. No one's going on holiday, right? These island nations. So not only do they rely on the food, the money coming in to run the economy, but they have to import majority of their food.
Yeah.
Where are they going to import that food from? And with no tourism and no income coming in, where do they get the money to buy that? It's not like they can print the US dollar. So most likely, any local
some of them can
currencies here are going to collapse, and I'm really thinking, what the fuck's going to happen to these small island nations?
Well, I think it really depends on how long this thing lasts. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, like, there was a program under Barack Obama called Cash for Clunkers. Are you familiar with that at all?
Nope.
Well, there's a lot of study done on it, and basically what the government did is they required people to get rid of old cars. They basically trade your car in and you get a bunch of money and an ability to exchange it for another car. And, the Democrats here just screamed about how they had, done this amazing thing that really spurred the economy on. And if you looked at it, basically the next month, the demand for cars was down by the equivalent amount that the previous month had jumped. So all you did is you moved the purchasing decision of a car up 1 or 2 months or maybe 6 months, right? So essentially you didn't do anything. And I'm looking right now at a lot of charts where people are, looking at business and small business and stuff. I think there's a similar effect that's happening here where there's a lot of people who are essentially accumulating cash. I mean, think about it. Like, there's some people that are out of work, but many people who are in work, and the government's doing a pretty good job of really encouraging companies to keep people hired. So there's a lot of people that are in work, and they're accumulating money. I mean, I'm saving so much money by not eating out.
Dude.
So much. I think what is likely to happen is that if we can get free of this thing by, let's say, maybe end of May. Let's say we see some light at the end of the tunnel, end of May, and people start coming out of their house, trickling out, and like a groundhog, and they start just participating back in a semi-normal economic way. I think this economy is going to rip. I think fourth quarter is going to be the biggest fourth quarter anyone's ever seen. I think there's going to be some areas that suffer. I think maybe restaurants might not be frequented as much because people for the first time in their lives have a pantry. So there might be some more like home cooking that occurs. But honestly, I think that people have saved so much money the last few months, those that have been in work, that what's going to happen is there's going to be a goddamn spending spree like we've never seen before. And people are going to be buying homes. I hope millennials are stashing away money because I'm sick of hearing them tell me that they can't afford houses. This is the time to do it, guys. Stash your fucking money away. Put as much as you can into this low market, and then when it rips, you'll have a lot more money than when you started, and that's how you afford a home.
See, I'm not so optimistic for a couple of reasons. Well, firstly, I'm not an economist. I don't know how you come out of a recession and you get the wheels of motion going again.
I think this will be a fake recession. I think it's a false recession.
Well, there's a couple of factors though. So, firstly, is how do we come out of it? And there's multiple ways. There is the fact that we don't really know whereby, say for example, the government turns around, say in the UK, say we get ahead of this by the end of the May, and they said, okay, we're gonna lift some of the restrictions, and perhaps they'll say certain kind of businesses can open, and then the kind of businesses we have to be in person: restaurants, hairdressers, gyms, salons. Okay, so that's the first thing they'll do, and maybe people who can work from home will stay working from home, and then they'll monitor that for a month and see what happens. Is there a spike? So there is that. But one of the other factors we have to put into this is, like, even if they do that, are people going to go back out to those businesses? Because we're all aware that any of us can catch this. Some of us don't know if we've got it. I mean, in some ways, it's the Willy Wonka ticket to have the test say you've had it, you're fine, great, I can fucking go out and do what I want. But if you've not had it, you're playing a lottery until either a vaccine comes out. So we're certainly not going to see the same numbers. And then when we do, is even though we have our freedoms again, some people are going to be like, do you know what? I don't want to go into a packed pub full of people because I might catch this. Or what's going to happen with sports? Like, think about live sports, right? Everyone, you go to a stadium packed with 60,000 people. Are they going to do it that basically will have social distancing at live sport to begin with? So they can only sell a seat that's in isolation, and all the seats that sit around that isn't. So basically only 1 in 9 seats is sold because people are so fucking scared. Or is there optional areas? Is there social distancing stand and the non-social distancing stand? What happens with dating, dude? Like, you can go on a Tinder date and you have a lot of success, and she's like, look, do you want to come back to mine? It's like, fuck no. I don't know if you've got COVID. I might have sex with you and die. Like, there's a lot of things. I don't think we just suddenly come out of this and think, right, everything full steam ahead. I think there's going to be a lot of fear in society. People aren't going to want to hug. They aren't going to want to touch surfaces. So I don't think it's not like when I interviewed Dan Moorhead, he talked about 9/11. The thing about 9/11, it was like that was a V-shaped mini kind of like market downturn. Planes didn't fly for 3 days. Everything stopped. No one knew what the fuck was going on. And then everything started again. We're coming out with so many different factors that I think are going to, naturally people are going to have fear. And also, what happens if they lift the restrictions and then suddenly there's another spike? Then you're in that situation where it's like, right, well, we either lock down until we get to the point where we have a vaccine, or I turn around and say, look, this is the reality. If you go out, you might get it. If you stay at home, you won't. You can do exactly as you choose. You have the complete freedom. Or that might even be forced upon them that you get so much social unrest. People are like, fuck this, I'm going out. So there's so many different factors at play. Yes, look, there's people out there who've got a perfect answer and they think they know the answer. Nobody knows the fucking answer. Like, we're all going to be dealing in hindsight.
That's true, but I tend to think of humans a little bit like cats. If you've ever looked at a cat trying to like explore an area, they put one paw in and then they back up, and then they put another paw in the next day and they like back up, and then eventually their head goes in and they back up, and then eventually they got half their body in and they back up, and then they get their full body in and they back up, and then eventually they're like 2 steps out and 3 steps out and 4 steps out, and like I think you're right. I think there's going to be a slowness to getting the economy back online, but I don't think that it's going to be that long, and we are so forgetful. I think that people forget. We operate news cycle to news cycle often, and people will literally forget what was told them yesterday. And I think that's the interesting thing. Think about, you weren't in the U.S. when 9/11 happened, I don't think, right?
No. I actually, my first ever time to America was 1 year after. I went to New York. That was my first ever trip there, and they were still clearing up.
Well, the level of patriotism that occurred after 9/11 was absurd, completely absurd. Everybody was together. Everyone had American flags in their yard. Everybody, and it was you. If I went back there right now, and I looked at that America, I would have looked at it and said, "This is a new America. We are going to be cohesive and just happy together, cuddly friends forever and ever." And now you look at today. If you fast forwarded from 9/11 to today and you just had a time machine where you did it in a second, you'd be like, what the hell happened? And it's just because everyone forgot. Everyone forgot the cohesiveness. And it happened like 2 weeks. It took like 2 weeks for everyone to forget that. It didn't take long. I remember it. 9/11 happened, everyone was together, and then 2 weeks later they're fighting again, as if 9/11 didn't happen. And that's just the way it works. Like, humans are very forgetful, particularly Americans. We don't like to change. We'll be afraid, and then we'll sort of habituate. And what's going to happen is very quickly we're going to be licking toilets again, because that's what we do in the U.S. as a tradition.
Well, there are differences between the US and the UK, and sometimes I forget that. Like, when I'm getting into some kind of discussion, debate on Twitter, and when I'm debating with someone from America, we're actually culturally very different in many ways. We speak the same language, right?
You guys are like Muslims.
We speak the same language, but we actually are very different in a number of ways. You know, we have a very different government. We have a very different way of operating. We don't have a fucking constitution. We've got a prime minister in an ICU, and we don't know who's running our country because we don't have any way of dealing with this. We are very different. Sometimes I think I have to understand that, but I know the way British people will be. They will come out of this and they will be very nervous of being around each other. They will.
But Brits are nervous. Brits are nervous about everything.
Yeah, not everything. I'm not. Nervous.
You guys are like just skittish little kitties.
Dude, I just went out to Venezuela. I just went out to the most dangerous slum in Venezuela. I mean, well,
it's not a statement about all Brits.
Yeah,
like, you happen to be on the thin end of that curve, right? Like, you're a danger seeker.
I'm trying to. I'm going to flatten that curve.
But yeah, like what are Brits going to do? They're like tea and crumpets, right? Like, that's y'all like your fish and chips and tea and crumpets and high tea. In America, we're like, yeah, time to go tame the woods. Like, we go look for the bar in the woods, and we're gonna kill them. We're hunters. We are frontiersmen, and I think there's a lot of. I mean, I don't think that these like Antifa type understand that, but there's a lot of that in Americans, and we like danger. Danger is a different thing here. It's I mean, a good example is that shooter that went into that church in Texas. He got a shot off, and then like a parishioner pulls his gun out and puts 2 bullets in his head a second later.
I love that story.
Like that is the most American thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm like, yeah, America. That's how we are. We are frontiersmen, and we're stupid. Like, I think that people underestimate the level of stupidity that Americans contain within them. Like, we invented backyard wrestling. Like, we are not the smartest population, and that works to our advantage.
Yeah,
COVID.
I'm not convinced, man. I'm not convinced the economy is just going to like whir up and go. And I don't know. I honestly don't know what's going to happen.
I think it's going to be in a goddamn rubber band, and everything's just going to like fire off.
I hope a lot of things. Like in this post-coronavirus world, I hope a lot of things change. You're right about the stuff at home though, because historically at home, we will go out for dinner once a week minimum. And we will have takeout at least once a week, right? And if I've got a busy week at work, 2 or 3 times, and what's been happening with the likes of your Uber Eats and your Deliveroos is you can actually get a good meal now. It's not like I cook dinner or you're having McDonald's. It's like I cook dinner, or I can order a salad or a like Wagamama's, or I can order fairly decent fucking food, which firstly means I get lazy, and secondly means I spend a lot of money. We've got a full fridge, and every single day I am cooking meals for my family. So we're saving money, we're eating better. There's actually loads of good things. I can't remember the last time I put petrol in my car, right? Once or twice a month, I'm filling up my car. That's another £150. I'm probably saving £100 a week on food. I'm probably spending about another £100 a week on alcohol. So maybe that's not so good. But that's not real. But we're exercising more. We're going out as a family. We're playing games. Like we're essentially. You know what we're doing? We're actually following our New Year's resolutions.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
We're following our New Year's resolutions. I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to eat better food. I'm going to be healthier.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend more time with my kids. All those things I make New Year's resolutions for, I never fucking do. I'm doing them. Literally doing them.
Yeah. I'm in a very similar boat. I think I realized in the middle of this pandemic that Americans have moved to I think this will be no surprise to you, but when I was a kid, we would go out to eat on a special occasion. It was something that we would, as kids, we'd be like, we're going out to eat, But as an adult, I think America's moved, in particular in the urban areas and the suburban areas, I think we've moved to a eating out all the time economy. And it's healthy to varying degrees, right? Like you can find good eating out or bad eating out, but it's about, I think Americans have perceived that the convenience of eating out is worth the trade-off of the time it takes to cook your own food. Well, here I am at home cooking a bunch, finding fast recipes, and for the first time in my life, I have a pantry, which I never had before. So I've started buying food in bulk, and I know exactly what I need and exactly what quantity. And I've been trimming down. I have very cans and in certain quantities, and I know when to replace them. And I've got pantry management down to a science now, which is like my grandma. And I'm realizing that after all of this is said and done, I'm logging into my bank account, and I'm realizing that I have an extra $3,000 or $4,000 in my bank account every month. And I've talked to a number of other Americans who said, eating out has become the single biggest expense that many of us have. Those who make a little bit more money, whom I know, are spending upwards of $3,000 a month on eating out. And think about it, that's $100 a day.
But where does that money
really
go? If everyone starts saving a bit more, like we need less fuel, we can walk. We don't like one of the things I wanted to stop doing is using my car unless I have to. Like I've enjoyed walking, just going out and walking. I love that. So if we stop buying as much fuel, if we're not going to restaurants as much, and we're saving more, what does that actually do to the economy? Because the economy is based on spending.
Things kind of. It doesn't mean that you're not going to spend. Like, you're going to still spend. It's just that you're going to have $6,000 to go on a vacation now, right? Like, people spend years of time. I wonder how much this is going to resolve some of the incredible debt crises that are looming under the surface. Like, how many people are going to be able to pay off the credit card they were never able to pay off before? I think perhaps there's going to be a lot of people that still frequent restaurants and stuff, but they're just going to have a lot more money in their bank account when all this is said and done. Maybe some of them will put it in the stock market for the first time in the history of their lives. Maybe this lowers TGI, is it TGIF? Or Olive Garden stock price, but it increases Costco's. So I think that there's people need the same amount of food. It's not disappearing, our need for food, right? It's disappearing, the allocation of certain capital in certain segments of the economy. And we'll see how that shakes out and where that goes. It's going to be very interesting. But I don't think that the ability to spend on more things, maybe honestly, Peter, this is what I'm saying. If all of us have an extra, let's say the average person, as a result of this, is able to suddenly have $1,000 extra dollars, right? Some people that's a lot of money. Some people that's not a lot.
It's your UBI.
Let's just say it's an extra $1,000, not per month, but just total for the next year. You all of a sudden have an extra $1,000.
Andrew Yang will be happy with that.
Oh yeah. Well, I think the average person spends in the fourth quarter $1,400 or something like that for Christmas, or $1,300. You might literally double the amount that every American spends in the fourth quarter on their kids for Christmas. It's astounding to me. I think that people don't realize that's going to go back into the economy and it's going to rip. That's my thinking on all of that.
I think, yeah, I'm not convinced by ripping, but I am convinced by there are unknowns, and I don't know. Like so many fucking unknowns. That's what I'm convinced about. There's so many unknowns.
You're more humble about it than me. I think it will rip, and you think it won't, and I think it's going to be fun to watch where that like lays out.
I think it will like kangaroo hop back and forth until we find out what we're actually dealing with here. Because I still don't think anyone really knows. People assume. People got assumptions, and
well, my assumption is based on the fact that I think when this is all done, everyone who got fired will basically get rehired, right? Like that companies will bring those people back, and there's a chance that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
and if it doesn't happen, there's a lot of problems.
Yeah, and that's what I'm worried about. I'm not sure that happens. I just think it'll take time for things to start chugging forward. The biggest problem will be cash flow. It won't be the fact that people won't want to employ people or get the business going. Look, firstly, there will be a boom in hairdressers, right? There will be an absolute boom in fucking hairdressers. Honestly, I was even considering like breaking the lockdown and smuggling a hairdresser in, dude. Fucking need a haircut.
You and I have had a similar thought. Like this beard is getting like unruly. I was going to go get the beard shapen. I've never had a long enough beard to shape it, and I was excited to do it, and then Corona hit, and now I'm just like, I'm scraggly now for a while.
Dude, honestly, I'm not sure what I want more, like to get laid or get a haircut. And I think I want a haircut. I really think I want a fucking haircut. But there's shit like that. Like, so the hairdressers will boom, and like all the salons will boom. I think the restaurants will have a very quick boom because a bunch of people will want to get out to have dinner because it's just been so long.
All I want, dude, is some chicken wings. I'm telling you, that's all I want. I just want some chicken wings, and like maybe I'm willing to get Corona for it.
I want a cheeky Nando's. You don't have Nando's there, do you?
No, what are Nando's?
Nando's is like this Portuguese chicken place we have in the UK. When you go for a Nando's, you just say, "I'm going for a cheeky Nando's," and you go and you can get like a half chicken, a whole chicken, chicken breast, chicken wings. It's fucking awesome. I want a Nando's.
All right,
I really want a Nando's. But yes, look,
like everyone's got a restaurant they want to go to right now. Like every morning for breakfast, I think to myself, how unfortunate I can't get a McDonald's McGriddle.
Oh well,
the greatest breakfast sandwich ever created.
I want a double from In-N-Out Burger, but we don't have that here.
Just like I'm just craving all sorts of foods, and I'm making great food here. Last night I made a pasta carbonara, which I've never made before, and it was the quickest meal I've ever made. I was very it's just fun to make some of this stuff, but I ate it and I was like, and I still want like a McDonald's hamburger.
Dude, well, what's going to happen? Like, you're in Florida. Like, what's going to happen with Disney when that reopens? Disney plus social distancing.
I think they're still open, by the way.
Are they?
I think they're just like measuring, it's Disney. I think they're like, fuck this.
Oh, man. Hey, listen,
measuring temperature
another thing I want to ask you about, like the nuance of US politics. How is Joe Biden the choice to go up against Donald Trump? Because like is he like, let me ask you, is he the fall guy because they know they're going to lose whoever they put up, so let's get rid of someone and save our good candidates for a 4 years time? Or is there like some weird process whereby he is the choice? Because what I don't understand as an external person, not fully understand US politics, I hear all about the DNC, which just sounds like a big fucking mess, but like I look at the candidates and I'm not a fan of Bernie Sanders' politics, but if you're a Democrat, it felt like he had a bigger chance of beating Donald Trump than Biden. Every time I see Biden videos on Twitter, he can't string a sentence together. It just seems like a confused old man.
Biden has clearly been in cognitive decline. We've all seen it, right? Like, I mean, I think the Republicans saw it early, and those who are centrists saw it early. Like, the instant we watched him on stage, we're like, what the? Like, we know Biden. He's been a mainstay in American politics for 50 years. We've all seen him. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden he gets on stage, and the guy, like, doesn't know where he is. And it's hard to watch because, we all had grandfathers and such that have, like, gone down the cuckoo train, right? Like, we've watched it in our own families. Alzheimer's or dementia. I think in this case it would be dementia. It's old age. Dementia is a hard thing to watch. And we're all watching it, and his cognitive decline is so quick. From month to month, he's much worse. And it's weird to watch. So, I mean, the American process is a pretty simple one. You have what's called a primary. So, like, all of the states individually put together sort of like a voting session, each state gets to decide for themselves how they decide. So there's caucuses in some. A caucus is where you get together and you sort of debate who you're going to give your delegates to, and then eventually, through magic, each individual area figures out who their delegate goes to, and then they report it to the state, right? And then there's also some that aren't caucuses; they're voting. So you like go and you pull the lever for somebody, and then the plurality wins, the plurality of delegates in that state. So there are two ways that states decide, and then it culminates in a convention where the delegates get together and declare their intent. Well, the Democrats and the Republicans both have different processes, and the Democrats have a superdelegate process, which basically means that they need a plurality, a certain number of these delegates from the states, and when they get to the convention, those delegates have to elect that person, and there has to be a plurality. 51% of those delegates have to pick that person on the first ballot. If they don't pick that person on the first ballot, what happens is a group of people called, and they're pre-designated, the superdelegates step in, and we move to what's called a brokered convention. So if Biden doesn't get 50% of the votes, delegates by the time he gets to the convention, there is a chance that we move to a brokered convention, at which point the Democratic Party can pick any person they want on the face of the earth.
So what was the split at that point?
Well, I think it's 1,900-ish delegates that Biden needs, and he has something like 1,200 right now.
And how many did Bernie have?
Bernie had between 900 and 1,000 the last time I looked. So
they were close. But Biden was ahead anyway. Close.
Biden was ahead.
Interesting.
And I don't think that Bernie's momentum was going to pick up at all in these later states. And I mean, I think that Bernie wants to use his delegates along with maybe Warren's to jockey for positioning in the party. But there's a lot of talk. I mean, my favorite conspiracy now is that Biden's realizing that he is in fact cognitively impaired severely. He may be in that sort of late stage where he's still lucid in that way. He's able to know what's going on. And there's people now positing that he should make Barack Obama his running mate, because while you can only run for president twice in America, I don't think there's actually a rule that you can't be vice president after being president.
Really? Obama?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's anything barring it. I think you can only not run 2 times.
God.
So if Obama doesn't run, then he could be vice president, and if Joe Biden ends up in enough cognitive decline, maybe Obama. So this is a conspiracy that some people are positing, sort of a conspiracy scenario. I like it a lot. There's also been people who think that there's going to go to a brokered convention and pick Hillary Clinton again, which would be just hilarious.
What about this Cuomo guy? I mean, he said no, but some people have said he would have had a chance if he could have made a late run.
Well, Americans like to pick people today that they think would have a chance. Andrew Cuomo, it's interesting to watch. Trump gets on TV and he says something, and Andrew Cuomo later on says exactly the same thing, and then you watch the media coverage of Trump, and they're like, what an idiot. And then you watch the media coverage of Cuomo, and they're like, we love him. Oh, he's the best. So, I mean, Cuomo is the governor of New York. It's a big state. He's a very well-known person. He has absolutely no name recognition. I think that's going to come and bite the Dems in the ass. They've moved their convention to August, so literally they only have 2 months to campaign. So this is going to get really weird very quickly.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a weird election. It's like the lockdown election.
Yeah, and I think that Trump is trying to prevent this from going to an all mail-in ballot election. I think my personal opinion is that he's right to do that. I don't think I think that the level of cheating in elections is very high. I think that there's a lot of people that would tell you that I'm wrong, and I think that they're wrong. So,
is there anything in the Constitution that allows the election to be postponed for a year?
No.
So it has to happen.
The election happens. I mean, I guess, yeah.
Fuck. So at a time of social distancing, you've got to have a general election. I mean,
yeah.
I think. Without Corona, my assumption was it was a slam dunk for Trump to get reelected. Do you think he's under any threat? It doesn't feel like he's under threat from Biden himself. It feels like he's under threat from Corona.
I think it really depends on whether the nation blames him for the situation of the nation, and if things get worse, if we can blame him, or if things get better and he gets people back to work with very little effect. Like, if Corona doesn't see a second wave in the United States, I mean, this is the thing about a lot of these RNA viruses. Like, if you look SARS or MERS, they burned themselves out. That's pretty common for a lot of these viruses. They're highly mutagenic, and what happens is they mutate to a point where they just aren't. They're not effective anymore, right? They aren't valid viruses. They aren't doing much. And there are reports even that Corona has got some new mutations in certain areas, and it's becoming milder and milder and milder. And
dumbass virus.
I wouldn't. Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, there are cases, like the Spanish flu is a good example, where it kind of had a first round of things, and then I think it was in Kansas on an army base that it started to, the first major problematic mutation happened, and then it went back around the world and killed a bunch of people in the fall. And so that can happen. That's pretty rare, I think, with a lot of these RNA viruses. Usually they just kind of mutate themselves out of existence. And so we'll see. I mean, this is a SARS virus, the SARS-CoV-2, I think, is like the official scientific designator. But my hope is that we don't see a resurgence in the fall. But there is a lot of people who believe that we will if this thing dissipates a little bit in the summer. But I think that we're going to be at the latest kind of out of this mid-May. And if we can get back to work, I think that Americans will appreciate that he didn't take too much. I think they'll appreciate that he did everything he could not to just give bailouts to big businesses and banks. Like, a lot of these bailouts that he's proposed have been small business bailouts and bailouts to individuals. And I think that those things are going to endear him to the American public, particularly minority populations, who maybe a black guy who owns a barber shop is able to, remain in business because he got a literal check from the government that is a loan, but at a very low percent, and a lot of it will be forgivable.
Signed by Donald Trump.
That's going to be high. Yeah. Well, honestly, I think he's right to demand.
Dude, I think his signature will be on the vaccine bottle.
Oh yeah, I think that he's going to call it Trump scene or something like that.
Yeah. All right, listen.
Trump liquid.
What fucking time is it there?
5:46.
Were you up already, or have you not been to bed?
It doesn't matter. I don't sleep.
All right, listen. I can't leave you without talking about Bitcoin. Do you even keep an eye much on Bitcoin? Where are you at with it?
I watch Bitcoin stuff. Less than I used to. It's funny because I think that what happened with Bitcoin is Bitcoin has always been very fun to watch, but the news is a little bit spaced out and gapped, right? And I think you probably realize this with the show. Back in the day, the idiots that you could have interviewed were hilarious. That was the Bitcoin Uncensored thing. We could have a scammer a week on, and it was just a blast because there was just a new scam every week, and people didn't know what blockchains did, so they'd be proposing new things, and it was just hilarious. It was a great time. As things have gone on, Bitcoin has sort of gained more and more market share. These the sort of factionalism, the crazy factionalism still exists, but mostly you're just talking to people that are kind of dumb and don't know what blockchains do. They're not trying to scam anyone. They just really like BSV, or they just really like BCH or something like that. And to me, a lot of the discussions have gotten very uninteresting. And I enjoy just kind of, I enjoy the higher level Bitcoin stuff. Sean, one of my co-hosts on Junseth's World, he's started the Florida sort of Socratic Bitcoin group, which was, originally it started up in New York. They have sort of a template for it, and he started it down here. And it's just more of, it's less the Bitcoin Uncensored way, and it's more of a just Socratic discussion about Bitcoin and information, and it's very highly technical. And I think that is probably, for me, that's an enjoyable thing to be around and to listen to, and I admire the people that are sort of the technocrats of Bitcoin. I've always been sort of a sociologist of Bitcoin, and I think there was a world for that, and I'm glad that I think that we captured the most fun part of the development of a new space. It was a lot of fun to watch, and it's just not like that anymore. Nowadays, it's more technocratic, and a lot of the projects that existed previously, like Ethereum and Tron and everything else, like, Factum, a lot of the stupid projects that existed are slowly disappearing. And like Factum, I guess, announced that they're probably not going to be able to be a going concern anymore. Which, if you go back to Bitcoin Uncensored, this is exactly what we predicted. And I think that's going to start happening. We're going to start seeing a lot of these stupid projects fail, and a lot of these idiotic blockchain ideas like Ethereum are probably going to go, the way of the dinosaur slowly. I don't know what you think of them, but.
Well, it's hard to me to judge them
there's
because
a lot of room.
I can't. I say it over and over again. Just the technicals go over my head. Like, I understand the basics of what a blockchain does. I understand the security model. I understand mining. I get all these things to a certain level. I can explain the basics, but to really fully technically understand, I just don't. I'm a creative, right? I can,
and I think that's fair.
I can look at a Picasso and or a Rothko and appreciate the beauty in modern art.
In the CIA art.
Sorry?
In the CIA art.
Yeah, the CIA art. No, I can do it, but I can sit and I can come up with marketing campaigns and I can come up with creative titles. I am just a creative. I'm not a technical person. But I've seen enough and I've spoke to enough people to know that Bitcoin, I don't even refer to Bitcoin as will it survive? Everything has a timeline, right? Its timeline so far is 11 years. It's not going away in the next probably month, 2 months, year, 3 years. So I'm pretty sure it's here for whatever its lifespan is till something better comes along.
Right. I think that's fair.
And then I look at something like Ethereum and I'm like, I so don't understand it at a technical level and I so don't understand the use case and I always talk about. So one of the things I've always done right, which I know fucks people off, but I don't really use my node. I talk about nodes being a pain in the ass. I talk about usability. I talk about the real world people. I make my show for the common man. I don't make it for somebody who can verify their own code and compile their own code, and I don't make it for those because those people are few and far between. And in doing so, it helps me be as objective as I can about Bitcoin. But I still understand Bitcoin enough to think this is worthwhile. There's nothing else that does that for me apart from stablecoins. I think there's certainly a significant and obvious use for US dollar peg stablecoins and the ability to flow between one and the other. I don't know about the long-term viability of Ethereum because I don't understand it. Some people say it's fucked. It's still here after a few years. Maybe it'll still be here in 5-10 years. I don't know. What I do know is
they're deleting the whole chain and building 2.0. Right?
Yeah, forever. But what I know is Bitcoin has value to me. It does some things that I can't do elsewhere. It would be great if there was a dollar peg stablecoin I trusted as much as Bitcoin, because do you know what? Right now, I've got savings, but actually, I don't want to have it all in cash in my bank. It'd be quite nice to have some of that on a blockchain, some USD on a blockchain that I can do with what I want, when I want, that is uncensorable. Now, I may be asking for too much. Everything else, I'm just kind of like, I don't get it enough. That's one of the reasons I ended up focusing on Bitcoin, because I didn't get it enough. But what I think I do get is I think I understand people. I understand my friends, and I understand people who aren't anarcho-capitalists, who are looking at Bitcoin and what it means to them. And that's where I always think I've had use in terms of my show. And it doesn't matter whether people like it or not. Just go by the downloads. If people are listening to it, it's obviously serving a value. It's obviously addressing an audience. If they're more,
it's a good show.
Yeah, if you're more technical, I say to people, if you want the deeper technical stuff, definitely go and listen to Marty Bent and Matt Odell. They're fucking on it. They're on the money. If you want something that's a bit more economics based, go and listen to Stefan Rivera. If you want something basic that's a bit more entertaining, listen to mine. And that's what I've always tried to do. But within that, I still have this fundamental belief in Bitcoin will survive, and everything else just seems kind of nonsense, but no one wants to admit it.
Yeah, and that's, I have my reasons for thinking they're all nonsense, but, again, that was the thing. Bitcoin Uncensored grew up in a world where A lot of that's, I mean, like, I think we started, I know we did. We started the show long before Ethereum was a thing, and we were making fun of it for a long time before the Ethereum chain launched. And, if you go back and listen to those, you'll hear a lot of the criticisms of exactly why Ethereum failed. We knew exactly why it wouldn't work, and now they're releasing a 2.0, and they're pretending like, oh, we always knew that we would have to scale it. Like, yeah, you can go back and listen to BU, and you can know that you didn't know that because we had discussions with you about how this wouldn't work, and you told us that it would. So, there's a lot of bullshit projects out there, and I thought, for me, Bitcoin was always fun because we were in the middle of it. I mean, OneCoin, that was a blast. All of this stuff. These are just moments that will never be created again, especially as Bitcoin becomes more of a sort of. Everyone uses the word ossified. I don't know that I like the idea of ossified code. The only code I can think of that's ossified is like robots.txt, which is a protocol that nobody really understands or knows unless they're like making websites. I don't think they've made a code change to robots.txt in 30 years or something. It's just an enormous amount of time. But like the idea of ossified code, I don't know about, but the idea of Bitcoin as sort of this ossified financial instrument, the idea that it would be something as in a mainstay, like a portfolio, to me, that's very interesting. I think that's a future that we're going to see. And, I think there's a lot of questions as to what Bitcoin is. And you look at things, you look at like investments, you try to do things like calculate Sharpe ratios and volatility and all that stuff. I think that there's going to be a lot of really interesting work over the years as to what Bitcoin is correlated with. How correlated is it with like oil? How correlated is it with energy prices? How correlated is it with like the S&P and the overall market? How correlated is it with software or hardware sales of like GPUs and stuff like that? Like what is it? How correlated is it with like betting season? These are all really interesting to me, and I'm very curious as to what that looks like in the future. Everyone likes to talk about what Bitcoin is today and what it's correlated with today, but the beauty of Bitcoin is it's sort of like this like tech stock, and it's doing its own thing, and it's got secret ambitions that nobody knows about because it's this weird sort of anarchic cohesion that brings it all together, and we don't know what the next stage for Bitcoin is because some person is going to create something or do something with it that surprises all of us, and that's kind of what's cool about it. To me, it's sort of like oil. We didn't know that oil was going to be the thing that allowed us to synthesize, gasoline and diesel and move cars down the road all the time, but in its original discovery, it was, an Indian salve that they would like put on wounds in Pennsylvania. And
but what do you think its role is? Because there are definitely different opinions. Some people just see it as I was chatting to Andreas the other day. Like he was talking about there's been this movement for Bitcoin to take down central banks. But he said he likes the idea of banking the unbanked, the fact that people have a form of money they can use, which is peer-to-peer, censorship-resistant, seizure-resistant. He talks about that. And look, I think there's a symbiotic relationship between taking down the central banks and having censorship-resistant money. But there's like a growing voice of anti-state. Bitcoin is the solution. Hyper-Bitcoinization, the Bitcoin standard. Yeah. Your mate Saifedean, my friend Saifedean.
Idiot. This is the thing about libertarianism that like gets me. There's this idea that like the world's going to collapse and the state of the world will be very different, and all of a sudden all the libertarians will emerge with their gold in hand, and they're the Silas Marners who hoarded the gold and emerge the great wealthy man. And it's an interesting thesis, but that's never how the world has worked. Fiat money is an asset, and you can use it, and Bitcoin is different than fiat money, and I don't see why there's a world where they can't both exist, coexist. I think they can exist together. I think that they serve somewhat different purposes. Bitcoin is highly volatile. Will it be like that always? I mean, maybe. We've talked about it. It's been talked about as digital gold. Gold isn't exactly a very stable currency. Gold is highly volatile. And this idea of like, well, not everyone is going to use it. Well, like not everybody buys gold, and yet gold has a multi-billion-dollar market cap. So, I mean, this idea of it banking the unbanked, it's a cute idea, but I think that probably cell phone minutes are better for banking the unbanked in places like Africa. I think that they have a much better model than Bitcoin itself. Like there are all sorts of things of value, and I think the thing that Bitcoiners don't realize, and this is what I mean, I come from it from a very different perspective than Andreas. Andreas has a lot of opinions, I think, about the way the world ought to look. I don't ever look at the way the world ought to look. I try to look at the way the world does look. There's a lot of things of value that can be exchanged. Fortnite bucks, cell phone minutes, cars in Rocket League, all sorts of things. And some of them make really good money for short periods of time. Crates in video games are a great example of that. And some of them make bad money for long periods of time. And some are proving out that they're really excellent at, maybe being held by people that don't necessarily need bank accounts. So they're, early in Bitcoin's history, we talked about how African nations kind of skipped the whole bank thing and they have banks on their phones. And, maybe there's a world in which we kind of like delete banks, but I just don't see it. And the other thing is this, banks don't hold cash. That's not their primary job. Banks hold whatever it is that you want them to hold. Banks are really good at holding assets. And I've always thought it interesting that Bitcoiners think that everybody wants to hold their own money. Nobody wants to hold their money. Holding your value is really, really hard. It's like holding a bomb. It's going to explode. Somebody will take it. And we need mechanisms of things like insurance, and we need mechanisms of things like security. And you want, I think most people want a level of abstraction in holding their own money so that they are not the responsible party for when it gets lost.
Don't you think there's a trade-off there, though? Like,
stuff.
For example, I haven't put all my money in Bitcoin. I've got savings in the bank. And I quite like that that's insured to some extent. But at the same time, I know during a crisis that the government can steal it if they really want. We've seen that in Europe in recent times, in the last 15 years, Greece and Cyprus. So
Ukraine, Greece, I mean, it's historical that countries do this.
But I can have some in Bitcoin, and if I want, I can have some gold under the mattress. I personally think it's prudent to have a mix. So I don't think it's either or, and I think there are some people who are happy to have a mix and they understand the value of having a mix of all of them. But more this kind of like, so you don't buy into at all this concept of hyper Bitcoinization, separation of money and state, and we're all self-sovereign.
Well, it's just dumb. Like nobody wants self-sovereignty. Like very few people want it.
Some do.
The people that say, no, they don't. They say they want it. Like, again, back to Bitcoin Uncensored, we had a number of principles, and I think it was number 3 is you don't want that. And the idea is that people say they want things all the time that they don't really want. And I mean, a good example, someone looks at like a yacht and says, God, I would love to have a yacht. And you're like, oh, you want a crew of 8, you want to pay 8 salaries, you want to pay, that yacht is $10 million, you want to pay $1.5 million a year in maintenance, you want to, spend $400 an hour on gas. And no, I don't want that. I want a yacht. Like, that's what a yacht is. That's what that is. So, like, there's a lot of things that people say they want, but that they don't want. And I think that those are things that people say they want, but that they don't really want. And they're cute ideas. Self-sovereignty, I mean, like, the question has to be, to what degree are you going to be self-sovereign? Because if you're self-sovereign, again, we're back to the Wuhan wet markets. Like, how long before I have to shoot you because you can't, because you're a guy who really wants to eat pangolins? Right. And that's putting me at risk because, like, you're going to get coronavirus. Like, now I have to shoot you. And because I'm self-sovereign and you're an externality risk to me. So, like, it's just a fake idea. There's a few people who actually might be capable of self-sovereignty. But, like, a lot of my perspective changed in Bitcoin.
Jameson Lopp. I believe Jameson Lopp is self-sovereign.
Jameson Lopp can be self-sovereign.
Yeah.
But he'll be self-sovereign in a world where, like, nobody knows he is except him.
Well, do you know what? When the shit hits the fan, I will pay to work inside his compound.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jameson. I'm with you on
Jameson,
that. That's exactly
how much
right.
I want to know up front, if shit hits the fan, how much do I have to pay? How much Bitcoin rent do I have to pay to live behind
Jameson
you and your
Lopp is
gun?
Jameson Lop is every Bitcoiner's bug out strategy.
Yeah, I'll go in. I'll go in the Jameson Lot Citadel. It might be a citadel with 10 people.
I like that.
I'll be in his militia.
We'll do that. We all serve Jameson. He's our king.
Yeah, there's some shit. There's some shit Jameson needs to do. He's got to look after the guns and the weapons and set up all the traps. But someone's going to need to mow.
Clean 'em.
Someone's going to need to mow his lawn, right? And someone's going to need to take out the trash. No,
I'll mow his lawn if I get the protection.
Dude,
from
I
Jameson.
will fucking pay for that shit. I believe that dude is self-sovereign.
You can be his butt boy.
Yeah, I believe that guy is self-sovereign, and I also believe he is principled, and I also believe he's responsible. He doesn't want war, but he will defend himself. He's not like some fucking crazy lunatic. That guy. Do you know the story? The first time I met him.
No.
It's the first time I shot a gun.
Oh, is he the one that showed you guns? Is that?
So I made my first podcast episode 2.5 years ago, and I saw this picture of I've told this story a few times, but I saw this picture of this guy on the internet with "Make Bitcoin Great Again" hat with a AR-15 or something. I was like, who the fuck is this guy? So I wrote to him, and I was like, I've just launched a podcast. Can I come and interview you? And he was like, yeah. I was like, can I come to you from the UK? And also, will you take me to shoot a gun? Because I've never shot a gun. He was like, yeah. So I turned up his house. He had all these fucking guns out that he was cleaning. Bear in mind, I've never touched a gun. And he had them all. And then he took me to this range to go shooting. Itself an amazing experience. I always compare it to bowling. I was like, this is just
Yep.
This is like people going bowling in the UK. You've got a lane each. There's a couple. There's a family. There's two buddies. And rather than throwing a ball down the alley, you're shooting a gun. And that was the first time I shot a gun. I shot 4 different guns. It scared the shit out of me. I did not. The films never, ever, ever put across how fucking powerful they are when you actually do it. And it blew me away. But yeah, so I'm Team Lop. I'm going to hide behind Lop. Lop, if you ever listen to this, I'm in.
I'll bet you that you realized how. I'll bet you Jameson has an utter respect for guns that you never saw anybody have for any object.
Yeah,
that's every American who has guns. By the way, that's what's funny. I don't think people realize. People kind of worship the respect of the firearm because it is such an instrument of power. And I think Americans realize that. And that's, I think that you can't understand the fight for firearms until you've watched that.
Well, even in the range, when we're outside looking at the guns, I was chatting to this girl who worked behind the counter, and I was saying, look, this is the first time I shot guns. And she was like, I've had them around me my whole life. I was like, oh, right, so you have guns at home? She's like, I've got 43 guns. I was like, what? Yeah. She said, yeah, I've got 43 guns at home. I was like, that's fucking insane. And then she'll show me one, and I picked one up. And even though they're all on the display and they're all, unarmed, I picked it up and just slightly held it up, and she quickly smashed my arm down. She's like, keep it down, keep it pointed down, even though they knew it wasn't loaded, the full principles. And I came away from that with a very different understanding and respect for guns.
Americans treat every gun as if it's loaded, if they're good at guns. Every gun is loaded, every gun will kill you. It doesn't matter if it's loaded or not, you treat it like it's loaded. And that respect is a very different thing. And that's why it misses.
But the problem happens when it gets in the hands of someone who's psychotic, mental, angry, and just doesn't give a fuck. That's the only problem. I think it's such a small percentage of people that create such a media friendly event. But
then you have the other side of it where and it's not a lie. And I don't like getting stuck in rhetoric because I think generally rhetoric tends to be untrue. But if you had a bunch of armed people around a crazy person who with a gun, he would be done. He might get 1 or 2 people, but it would be as effective as going around with a knife.
Yeah, because but it's hard to argue with the correlation between gun deaths in the US and other countries. I'm just saying you have to debate and be fair about the trade-off. This is the trade-off. This is what we're accepting.
Well, that's I think what most Americans realize, and I think these urbanites who dislike guns, I mean, it's their prerogative, but I think the other trade-off is that you're a woman walking down the street and you just cannot defend yourself. This is the reality. The guns are the great equalizer. If somebody comes to do something to you, it doesn't matter if you're fat, thin, tall, short. Guns are the great equalizer. And if you're a better shot than the other guy, you win. And
not every time. Not if they walk up behind you and shoot you in the head.
Correct.
That's the thing. And look, we have a massive knife crime. We talked about it earlier in the UK. A massive. Although it just came up while we're doing this session, like a news alert on my phone. Listen to this. This is hilarious. Stabbings have stopped. Gang rivalries on hold amid coronavirus lockdown. There's an argument for a lockdown.
That's like in the Philippines. Whenever there's a Pacquiao match, all the rebels stop protesting and they put aside their warring to go watch the Pacquiao fight. Which it's very funny the way that people work. But yeah, okay. So stabbings have stopped. I gotta say, I'm way more afraid of walking through the UK and getting stabbed by some butterfly knife than I am walking through the United States.
Yeah, but that's because you're seeing external media. I'm not worried about being stabbed in London because I live here and I know what goes on and what goes on where.
Well, you haven't embraced your inner Bitcoin and gone into the shady parts of London.
Well, we know our safe zones in our local areas, but yeah. Anyway, so to take us back, so yeah, Jameson Lopp. I asked first. I asked before Junseth. So if you need someone to take your trash out during the apocalypse,
and I'll do it, Jameson. I'll comb your beard.
So you don't believe in that with Bitcoin we can have this separation of money and state and this perfect idealized society. You don't buy into the Bitcoin standard because a lot of people, let's be honest, I've read the book, I like the book, I like aspects of the book, not all of it. I recommend people read it. I think, but you don't believe we can live on a Bitcoin standard.
Well, I don't think that any kind of standard makes any sense. I mean, money is a representation of sort of like the social value behind it in some ways, right? Like, I think understanding like a gold standard or a silver standard, if you really understand it, you understand why it's unfeasible. And the reason it's unfeasible is because there's not enough gold or silver in the world to represent all of the value that exists in the world. Like, let's say, but
doesn't that just force the price of the gold up so it can do that?
No, because let's say you have 1 million pounds of gold, and every year you have a little bit more, value created in the world. You don't have more gold created in the world to like match that value. Like,
no, but the gold just becomes more expensive to buy.
Well, what's the point? Then what's the difference between that and paper?
Now you're getting into economics. There'll be
that's what I'm saying.
Safer would be much better here to argue this with you.
Well, he wouldn't be because he doesn't have any idea. Like that, it's such a dumb argument. Like the reason that we have fiat is that it allows the state to, as a mechanism, to basically give you something that is a system of IOUs, and you can trade that for anything you want, including gold. So, I mean, that's kind of my point. Is like the reason that Americans, the reason that Saifedean or any of these others are able to hold Bitcoin is the fact that they were given this thing that they say has no value, which is fiat, which they then used to purchase some quantity of Bitcoin in exchange for that fiat. And I think that the most dangerous enemy of fiat, and I think fiat's a very important thing, by the way, and the reason I think it's important is because of the anonymity of exchanging bills. I think that's a very important part of the world, and I think that paper makes that really simple to do. I think that's a good world, and I think the freedom to do things with your money, like buy Bitcoin or create Bitcoin or buy computers or buy gold or silver, whatever you want to do, I think that that's a really cool thing. And fiat is the mechanism whereby we have been able to have a free economy where people can make those decisions, and we can take that away. I suppose we can force people to start using Bitcoin, or we can say, you know what, the state mechanism of fiat exists and that's good, and Bitcoin also exists, and what you can do with your state fiat is that you can buy a little Bitcoin if you want to hedge against something that you think is going to happen in the future. I think it's perfectly reasonable to hedge. I think it's reasonable to have some gold or silver or Bitcoin or whatever you want in your house. I think that those hedges are important. I think coronavirus takes the mask off of these people who are, so-called preppers. I think that prepping a little bit is a good idea, and you can diversify your preps. And I think everyone should diversify everything. I think that diversification takes a lot of the risk out of things. So if you had a little gold, a little silver, a little Bitcoin, you would not be stuck with the one metal that nobody is willing to exchange things for. I don't know, maybe some bronze piping that you carry around with you just in case you need, or copper that you need to exchange. I think that's all totally fine. Having raw metals, they're useful metals. Gold is not particularly useful except as a medium of exchange, perhaps. It's not, or like putting in your mouth as like teeth. But I think that that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. What I don't think is necessarily reasonable is thinking that the entire economy is going to go away and then Bitcoin will be there to replace it. It is, again, in line with like this libertarian dream that like sort of the chaff falls away and emerges from it like this Bitcoin dream where the whole world turns to Bitcoin as the economies all collapse one by one, and here we emerge and Bitcoin is the answer. And it just doesn't work like that. Like the world kind of is a much more incremental place where today it's this way and tomorrow it's going to be this way plus one. And a year from now, it's going to be this way plus 365 days. And it's going to look a lot like today, but when you have 100 years of that, it's going to look a lot different. You know, when you have this day plus 100 years, it looks a lot different. But in a small scope, it doesn't. And 100 years from now, I'm willing to bet that the world will look very different, but that currencies will still exist. And there's going to be a world that has a semblance of the old world because you're going to be able to trace the old world all the way to the new one. And I don't think involved in that is going to be like the entire world collapses and we end up in like a Shadowrunner kind of world where people are doing like, you know, using cred sticks to run errands for gangs in the hood. I don't think that that's necessarily the world we end up in. Maybe it is this like post-apocalyptic sort of world, but I think it's going to look a lot like it does today, plus maybe some flying cars.
So why do you think then there's this such a strong kind of movement around this hyper-Bitcoinization and the separation of money and state, and there's such a belief that you can have a Bitcoin standard, and it's not really challenged that much, to be honest. And when
it's not challenged, it's not challenged because it's said by a bunch of people who agree with each other. Like this is what an echo chamber looks like, right? You have people, Francis Pouliot or the people that I like, but who I think are very wrong about sort of Trace Mayer. Who just dream of a world in which, Bitcoin is sort of the only thing that exists. And, who's going to come and tell them that they're wrong? Like, first of all, like legitimate economists who come around are going to look at them and laugh, and they're just not going to engage with them. Other Misans are going to completely agree with them. It's really more of a religion in that sense. Like they're in the pews, and no one's going to tell them they're wrong while they're at church, and they're always at church. So it is what it is, and I just don't think it's worth arguing because they're arguing about something like that they claim is going to happen in the future, but their crystal ball is as cloudy as mine. They don't know what's going to happen tomorrow any more than I know what's going to happen, other than the fact that they think that they've done this thing that humans do, which is extrapolated to infinity. And it's you have this chart, and you put in your Excel chart, and then you do an X squared formula, and you find out it does this. And all of a sudden, it's like, from here to 1 billion. And they look at inflation, right? And they're saying, oh, well, inflation goes up at, on average, 3% per year. And if inflation is going up at 3% per year, then what is that? It's going to my money's going to be worth half of what it's worth in 24 years. And if we do that again and again and again, eventually $100 is going to be worth what $1 is today very quickly. And that's, you can't live in a world like that. Meanwhile, you look at things like incomes, and average income goes up pretty much exactly with inflation. It actually slightly exceeds it. Average home prices go up with inflation. Average everything, CPI, all this stuff. Like, in the meantime, iPhones are invented, and everyone spends $900 on a phone in a world where apparently we can't afford anything because all of the value of our money is inflated away. When I was a kid, you had one phone per family. You would call Michael's mom, Jeannie, and you would say, "Hey, Jeannie, can I speak to Michael?" And she would give Michael the phone, and then she would go downstairs and have the other phone. And when she needed it, she'd pick up the downstairs phone and say, "Michael, I need the phone. Get off." And
did you have those phones where you had to spin the dial?
You could get them.
That's what we had. That was our first phone. Yeah. You had to spin each fucking number. And then, if you got wrong halfway through, you'd have to start all over again.
But what's interesting about that, by the way, is those phones are of higher quality than our cell phones, right? Those are analog phones. And if you grab a phone from 1960, in terms of the quality of the listening, it's as good as a phone from the 90s. And in the meantime, now we have this world where we pay about 100 times more per phone. Every single family has a phone, and every single person in the family has a phone, and they have a plan on every single one of those phones, and they pay $150 a month instead of $70 for the phone on the wall. And in order to schedule a meeting, you have to confirm with the person 3 minutes before the meeting actually happens, or they just won't bother to show up. Whereas when I was a kid, you would schedule something at 3 p.m. and you would just be there at 3 p.m., right? So like this is like the way the world has evolved, and it's a new world, and it's improving all the time. The world is constantly getting better. And I mean, if you want to understand how quickly it's getting better, just think of the value that's in the market. Like the market doubles every 8-ish years, about 7.5 to 8 years. So, I mean, I would say that maybe you might be able to pull some metric from that and say the world's doubling in improvements every 8 years. And I think that's a pretty cool world that's existing under fiat. And I don't see that turning into this like apocalyptic nightmare that all of these people think is coming. I think that it's just going to continue to improve, and there will be times where it's worse, and there will be genocides, and there will be wars all throughout this. And in the meantime, the world will just kind of continue to tick on, and we'll end up with a world that looks very similar to this, but with also some Bitcoin and some cool things that Bitcoin does.
Fucking statist.
Yeah, I've been accused of it. For a while, we were getting accused of being spooks, which I always loved.
So what areas of Bitcoin do you think aren't being debated that should be debated? And like, I think this is healthy to debate. And I know the responses that I'm going to get. I know I'm going to maybe lose some listeners. I know a couple of Bitcoin is going to write to me and go, "You're fucking full of shit." And there's other people going to say, "Oh, you were so close. You were going in the right direction, and now you're heading in the wrong direction." And like, I know all the criticisms that will come in, and then I know I'll get all the private messages, the private DMs, and the private emails, and say, "Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I'm not going to post it publicly, but I've got the same concerns with you." Like, what areas of healthy debate do you think are needed around Bitcoin?
Well, I think that the question of what an unbanked person is an interesting one. I would like to hear what Andreas believes an unbanked person is. I assume that Andreas believes an unbanked person is like a single mom who just can't get a bank account. But like, I tend to view unbanked people for the most part as like drug dealers. And if we go with my definition of what unbanked is, I agree with Andreas as to what Bitcoin's for. I think that Bitcoin is dissident value. I think it's value for dissidents, people that are generally locked out of economies. I think it's a really and that can mean different things in different places, right? In North Korea, that might mean that like you're a dissident because you speak up against the state and you agree with American values, right? In America, that might mean that you're a drug dealer. So I think it's dissident money. I think that it's cool because it holds value. It has a value, and I think that like it's probably going to be the kind of thing that allows people to move large amounts of value in ways that previously were done by black diamond smugglers. So I think it has a lot of really neat uses. I think the fact that you can hold enough Bitcoin on a tiny little chip, as much Bitcoin as you want on a tiny little chip, whereas like a diamond takes up space and you can only have so much is an amazing feature of Bitcoin. And I think that that's probably its principal use. I think that gambling is going to continue to probably use Bitcoin. I think that there's going to be some really fun actual smart contract stuff that we're going to see using Bitcoin. Like as we move forward, I think that banks are going to start using Bitcoin in some really fun ways. I think the idea of a stablecoin type instrument issued by a bank. I mean, if you think about the way the banking system works, when you have your money in like a Wells Fargo, and this is kind of old Bitcoin discussion, you're not holding your money isn't actually in Wells Fargo. What you have is a Wells Fargo IOU, right? And this is like the libertarian obsession with fractional banking. You don't have an actual dollar in there. You might have like 10% of a dollar. And when you go to Bank of America, your balance can be reified by you taking that money out of the bank, right? Like you actually get that cash. But you don't, when it's in there, it's more of like a Heisenberg dollar. It may or may not exist. As long as there's not a run on that bank, your money does exist in that bank, right? So like there is precedent for like a bank to possibly do some sort of like stable coin. Although I think most people would say that like that abdicates a lot of like government responsibility. But you could probably do a stable coin on Bitcoin, like a Tether type thing that does that. And you could probably bank the unbanked rather cheaply that way, giving them fiat and essentially IOUs from the bank that you have with the ability to kind of do the tracking that banks need to do. I don't know. But there's a lot of really cool uses.
That was my experience in Venezuela, in that when I went there, you get the reality by visiting a place that the majority of people are living under $5 a month. There is absolutely no possible use for Bitcoin for people living on $5 a month. They're not going to move to a new volatile currency with relative high transaction costs. You know, if every transaction cost even costs like 10 cents, that's too expensive for somebody living on $5 a month. So they're not going to move to that. They're not going to move to that currency. It's not going to unbank. It's not going to bank those unbanked people. I met some people in El Salvador using Lightning, and that was cool, but I also felt like each of them in their wallet, they needed a dollar stablecoin as well, and they needed the ability to move between their Lightning Bitcoin and the dollar stablecoin like freely and at low cost, because at least at that point they can, if they want to save a bit of Bitcoin because they believe in the long-term fundamentals of Bitcoin, cool, but day to day if they want to use that money, which is money they're earning, and spend it, then they needed something that was really, they needed to put most of it back into the dollar.
Well, this is the thing that is really neat about Bitcoin, is that you kind of decentralize the banking infrastructure, right? So like this is a perfect use for something like Coinbase. You know, like I don't know what the legal, like what the regulations would say about a Coinbase, but real simple. I mean, like a Coinbase like company could be banking people from America, and they could be moving things on a database that essentially makes these off-ledger transactions free, right? And the only reason they're trusted is because they're an American company. Like those types of things are the kinds of things that are big innovations for company or for people that maybe can't use something that's going to transact at a 10-cent transaction fee, because but they're willing to hold their value in something that they can exchange on a database off ledger. And you're talking small amounts, $5-10, and they're just transferring it between, I don't know, some American company's wallet. And for that, I mean, that's a pretty cool thing that they could be able to do that. And I don't know if that's actually happening now, but the innovations that are capable of happening are the fact that, like, in Silicon Valley, someone can develop something that someone in Venezuela can use. Whereas, like, most products, like most Venezuelans probably can't use necessarily, like Amazon AWS. But they could use, like, Bitcoin on Ledger, and nobody could do anything about it. Or off ledger, and nobody could really do anything about it. And there could be an American company that facilitates that. I think years ago, like Catapult or Coinapult, I think was doing stuff like that, that kind of thing. And whatever happened to all that stuff. But like, I think that there's a lot of really neat opportunities that can occur in the future. And if those are the people that like Andreas is talking about as the unbanked, then great, more power to you. But you need somebody to be stupid and to like take the risk of like maybe doing something illegal. Like this is the Charlie Shrem bet. Like we all know what Bitcoin needed, right? Bitcoin needed a great onboarding tool, and Charlie Shrem's like, I'm an idiot, I'll do it. And so he like did the thing that we all knew needed to happen, and now like everyone looks at him as this great innovator. Well, it wasn't like an innovative idea. It was just that he was the guy who was willing to take the risk, for which he went to jail, for which he also had a lot of money, and I think still has a lot of money. So like, this is the nature of this like innovation. We're talking finance. Money has always been regarded as dirty. It was dirty way back when the Jews were doing usury, or like considered usurious lending. But that the whole world knew that they needed loan makers, and the people that were willing to make the loans, were sort of ghettoized, and they were definitely marginalized. But the world needed loans. And money was like this dirty lucre, and money's always been dirty. And if you look at like the Bitcoin exchangers now, like these local Bitcoin guys, they're regarded as like these dirty money changers. But if you think about it, these guys are the innovators. These guys are the ones that are willing to take the risk of possibly getting shot or arrested or whatever it is. And they're taking on an enormous amount of personal risk, basically being a dealer for a new kind of money. And it's still regarded, I mean, they are sort of like, the world regards them right now in the way that the world regarded like the Jewish moneylenders back in the day. And it's interesting for me because I think that I've never had the opportunity to view money as dirty. And I've always wondered what that was like. And now I see it. With Bitcoin, we see dirty money. We see what that means. And it's the people holding this thing. They're exchanging in this dirty, disgusting commodity. that heroin users need, that people need, and they're the providers of. And those are the innovators. I think that, like, when all is said and done, the stories that we tell about Bitcoin are going to be about the money changers in the same way that that's sort of the history of old money.
I don't think we can end in a better way there, dude. There's no follow-up to that.
Yeah?
That's a perfect ending. Oh, wow. Listen, this is going to get some interesting responses. Probably.
I'm excited.
It's going to probably push some of the maxis further away from me already. Lose some more friends.
Just so you know, I am. We like to claim it, but it's kind of true. Vitalik coined the word Bitcoin maximalism after having an argument with me and Chris. So we've always claimed that we are the first maximalists because of that. There have been plenty of people that have been, what maximalists would have been, but essentially that article was written after he had debated us in a counterparty chit-chat group back in the day, and we were insulting Ethereum, and then the next day that article came out.
Well, listen, look, I am a maximalist in that I only believe in Bitcoin as a blockchain, crypto-based currency outside of the use case for some stablecoins. I am a maximalist. I fundamentally am. What I'm not is a fully sold Bitcoin standard, anti-state, anarcho-capitalist, conspiracy theorist, although that's kind of an unfair word to use sometimes because it taints the word, it taints some critical thinking, but you know what I mean. I'm just not one of those maximalists. I'm a Bitcoin maximalist trying to live in the real world, trying to practically navigate everything that's in front of us, not living on a theory of a better world of complete free markets and liberty being achievable in the way that they think it is. I'm not saying it can't. There is a journey to rationalize some of these ideas, and I often come up against questions that I'm like, I can't answer this one here, and I don't know if this one will be better, and I'm not just going to agree with it because it's written by Rothbard on the Mises Institute website. I just don't think that's how humans behave, so I don't think that will happen. And that's in terms of where I'm trying to explore with the show now, that's where I feel like that's where I want to explore. I really want to question all this stuff because there is a strong narrative about this. It's a very hard narrative to fight against because so many of the hardcore Bitcoiners are behind it. The cult of Safedean's book is that this is the leading book on Bitcoin, therefore it is gospel. I don't 100% agree with it. I think people should read it, but I'm not 100% sold. And I want to explore this. And in exploring it, I'm thinking, oh, fuck, this is going to get people shouting at me, getting people calling me a statist, getting people calling me an idiot. But I think these are fair things to debate and discuss, and that we shouldn't just blindly... The same reason that I criticised Safedean's opinions on modern art, using his economic lens of time preference, that modern art is narcissistic and lazy and easy. I fundamentally disagree with that, and I absolutely stand against that. But I still think part of his books is interesting. I think
you and I grabbed onto that part of the book equally as we took different approaches to it, but both of us found that part very offensive.
Yeah, entirely offensive. I found it entirely offensive as somebody who loves all forms of art and creativity. Look, there's three obvious genres of work which is there to challenge authority in the state. I think it's journalism, artists and comedians. And when I say artists, you don't have to just say canvas paints artists. You can throw into their musicians. You can throw in Rage Against the Machine or Bob Dylan or anyone. But any form of creativity, journalism and comedy is there to challenge assumptions, to challenge the state. And a lot of modern art is there, a lot of dissident modern art is there to challenge the state. Banksy going to Palestine and putting a piece of creativity on the wall which divides Palestinians and essentially keeps them in a state prison is really important. And then to fire an economic lens that says all modern art is narcissistic, I personally think is dangerous. I think it's wrong. I 100% disagree with that. And the reason I'm so anti it, and the reason I'm so vocal against it, is because interestingly, when I have challenged it, I put a tweet out recently when I challenged it, and there were a lot of people are saying, yeah, it is narcissistic, it is modern art, it's garbage. And I wonder how many of them would have thought that if there was no Bitcoin and no Bitcoin standard. I wonder if they're now they're convinced by the words in a book. It's talking about time preference has taught them that work isn't of artistic value. And I as much as I support his freedom of expression to say that, I fundamentally disagree with it. I think it's a moronic statement. I think it's highly offensive, and I will tell everyone that who stands by that I disagree with them. I am, it fucked me off. Yeah, it did. So I disagree with that, Saifedean, and we're no longer friends because we hold different opinions, and I am blocked by him on Twitter. What is that, dude?
I've been collecting little Bitcoin art from people, and buying it. This is made by some Ukrainian artist, and it's really good.
Well, that's the thing. That's one of the ironic things. Almost all Bitcoin art is modern art, right? It's almost all modern art. You don't see any kind of Bitcoin fine art. It doesn't exist. All Bitcoin art is modern art. It's all dissident modern art. So therefore, the Bitcoiners who are like what's that guy? Crypto Graffiti, right? He is a modern artist, and he is somebody who's spreading the word of Bitcoin through art, but he's doing it through dissident modern art.
Well, this is the secret of Bitcoin Uncensored. For those who are listeners, I always said while we were making it that I viewed the project, the entirety of it, as a modern art project, a postmodern modern art project.
You fucking lazy narcissist.
Well, that's the thing. Like the entire point of it was to get people to ask the question, what's up and what's down, and is down and is up, and just to challenge assumptions. And that was the thing. Like in Bitcoin Uncensored, we occupied very specific characters, and it was a canvas we were painting on, and I think we did a pretty successful job of it. And we went for years with people trying to figure out what the fuck was going on, why people liked it. And I think it was Pete Rizzo who finally figured out that it was an art project. And he wrote an article called, I think, The Summer of Bitcoin Uncensored, in which he called it shock art. And I was like, yep, Pete's the first person ever to figure out what's going on. But I have a very special place in my heart for art and the story of art, because I think art is dialectic. I think art is conversational. And I think if the artist themselves, I mean, like there is some aspect of art that is, you put it into the world and the world makes of it whatever it wants, right? It can misinterpret or interpret. But like the podcast medium, at least in that case, was interesting because we had some influence on how the world viewed it, because every week we got to comment on the way the world was currently viewing it. And it was just a very interesting medium to paint in. And I always viewed it as art. I still view it as art. I think that for me, whatever happens in my life, this might sound like a stupid statement, but that is sort of, that show was, for me at least, my masterpiece. And I really have always loved that about it, that it sort of has stayed the test of time, and that people really got a lot of enjoyment out of it while not fully understanding exactly what I was thinking and what I think we were thinking when we were making it. Because, I think art is commentary, and if art is not engaged in the discussion, and this is actually what I was saying with you, Rothko is Rothko, and I think you have to understand like the conversation that was implicit in these paintings. What conversation was he having? Which is why I think it's interesting about the CIA stuff with modern art, because the conversation that art has is very important, and generally, I think art for art's sake, like art for the sake of beauty, is fine, but I think that removes sort of the telos of art, whose purpose is to actually move society and change thinking. And if it's just art for beauty, then you might as well just buy counterfeit art.
Exactly, because then it's just about the aesthetics. And if anything, I can't think of the word I'm trying to say, but if it's just art, if it's just for beauty's sake, then it's just about the aesthetics. And that's not what it's about. Like, art is emotion. I can go to Tate Modern. It's my favorite building in London. I can go and they've got the I haven't been for a while actually, but they've got the Metamorphosis of Narcissist. I always pronounce it wrong.
Those are the discs, the spinning discs.
No, this is the what's his name? He's got the gallery up in St. Pete's, past Tampa.
Is he the one that plays with light?
No, the fucking. Why can't I think of his name? It's so funny. The irony of talking about art and art and defending it. I can't even think of one of my favorite artists' names. Dali. Fucking hell, Salvador Dali. He's got the.
Dali,
have you been to his? Yeah. Have you been to his gallery up in St. Pete's?
I have, yeah. And
fucking amazing.
Well, what's cool is that he's a Florida man, and his curator a number of years ago kind of dumped a bunch of Dalis, so you could actually pick up Dalis here in Florida galleries for fairly cheap. Some really interesting like sketches and stuff like that. So there's a lot of people, there's a lot of Dali down in Florida, which is very interesting.
Well, this is why I love my kids, right? Because I took them to Disney. We'd always wanted to go to Disney. In 2 years we went, and about 3 or 4 days in, we were bored. I was like, do you want to do something different? And they're like, yeah. So we looked up and we found the Dali Museum. I was like, fuck it. So
that's
like
awesome.
A 3-hour drive or whatever it was up through Tampa. And we went and we had the most amazing day up there and they loved it. But what I'm saying is I can go into Tate Modern. They've got the Metamorphosis of Narcissist there. I think it's still there. They also, at one point, they had Climb Blue, which is the $17 million painting, which is just a blue square. They had the Rothko Room. They may even have Picasso and Monet. I'm not a Picasso fan. I love Rothko. I love the Rothko Room. And I just, for me, it's really simple. I just go, and some things move me. Some things I want to look at for 30 seconds. Some things I want to look at for like a few minutes. Some things I want to talk about with my son. Sometimes it's photography. Sometimes it might be, like, I'm a massive fan of Ai Weiwei, to the point that I've actually got an Ai Weiwei tattoo. I've got an Ai Weiwei tattoo on my leg of a living guy because I love the work he did. The work he did when he went to, after the earthquake in China, I can't remember the region, but all the buildings collapsed because of the bullshit regulations. He went and got they went and stole all the like metal cables, and he created like a modern art sculpture out of it, which to me was highly effective in challenging the loss of life due to the lack of building regulations and corruption in building in China. And that to me is fucking hugely important.
Ai Weiwei at this point is one of the longest living critics of the regime of the CCP. And it's largely because the world views him as a commodity artist. And if he were to disappear, it wouldn't be like random guy with a briefcase standing in front of a tank disappearing. It's Ai Weiwei, one of the world's most important artists. And he's important for the very reason that he criticizes the regime. So, I think, it's interesting to me. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting art, and I think that art really needs to be looked at through the lens of its story. And, that's to me,
not
like I look at
economics.
Yeah, and I think I look at well, the economics is often part of the story, and I think people miss that. And I look at like a Pollock, and it's this deconstructed sort of like just splatter on a painting and on a canvas. And I think if you look at that, and you look at that as like an extension of like a Monet, eventually, like you look at the history, like you have these perfect sort of replications of someone's face, and then you go into sort of this more abstract time, and eventually you get to like just splatter paint, right? Because we had photography, so art had to take on a different thing than capturing a moment. Like paintings had to take on something different than just being representative of your face or your family. And so they had these schools of art that basically abstracted from the original intent. And what's interesting is, I mean, this is something, again, that I would regularly talk about back in the day. Every artist wants to get to the point in their career where they can just shit on a canvas. And
that's the Joe Rogan. It's fuck you art.
It is, and that's the thing. Like you want to get to that point where like your shit is worth money, and that's Pollock. If you look at Pollock's early stuff, he's a beautiful painter. He's actually extremely good at painting, and a lot of the splatter paint stuff is both performative, but also like at the point where he's demonstrated that he has the technique and the talent to do it, he now finds a sort of a new thing he's able to do with paint, and demonstrates another kind of technique that he does that are applied on all sorts of paintings that aren't just splatter paint, but it's a Pollock technique, right? And he evolves the art form of painting in a way that's very interesting and nonsensical, but also evolves. But he does that because he first proves himself as a talented artist. And I think that's the thing that people forget, is that before you get to the part where you can shit on the canvas, you have to prove that you are capable of selling your shit because you didn't have to shit on the canvas, and that becomes a statement in itself. And I think that like modern art is very important, and I see that sort of dismissive like attitude of somebody like a Saifuddin, and it's not all modern art. I think that some modern art is absolutely stupid, but art is commentary. So to the extent that it's commentary, the story of it matters. And there's a lot of art that is art for the sake of beauty, which I think is fine, but I don't find that to be compelling. And then there's art that's sort of like pseudo commentary. That's like try hard art, where they're trying really hard to make commentary. And it's not that important. Like I saw one once, it looked like a Pollock splatter paint, and the artist told a whole story about how it was New Orleans under the waters of the flood. And I was like, go fuck yourself, you fucking asshole. Like, it just wasn't interesting. Like, that's not an interesting piece. It didn't comment on anything. A lot of modern art now is like, pictures of Donald Trump doing weird shit. There's like an artist who does like the golden toilet. He did one, I think, to make fun of Trump, and like these types of things are very stupid, very, very stupid to me. They're not beautiful. They're not interesting, and the commentary is puerile. It's very, very sort of stilted attempts at saying something, and it's not something interesting. It's something sort of with mass understanding. So it's sort of like grabbing a bat and hitting society over the head with something that they already think, versus like giving nuance and clarity. And that's why memes are so important today, because memes are exactly that. Memes are these like small statements, these small pithy sort of encapsulated moments that mean something more than you necessarily would have thought of. It's like a way to advance the discussion in 3 words. And art has often been a means to advance a discussion in one picture. And our experience with it, again, today is very different than like our experience was with it back in Da Vinci's day. And I've thought about this a lot, where like you're raised nowadays with this like ability to see the Mona Lisa anytime you want. So then when you go see the Mona Lisa, you look at it and you're like, oh, it's a lot smaller than I thought. Right? That's going to be your commentary. But back in the day when Da Vinci painted it, people would be in their town and they'd be like, I hear that 200 miles away, there's the most amazing painting anyone has ever seen. I want to see that painting. And you could people could draw pictures of it. They could kind of sketch it out what it looks like. They could tell you what it looks like, but you never could ever experience it without literally walking 200 miles and laying your eyes on it. And that's not our experience today. So art means something different, and to me that it's very important. I guess that's a big divergence from where we were going.
Yeah, and and I keep looking down here because my Zoom is about to fill up. I've got 4 minutes and 52 seconds left, and that Zoom's full. And it's happened a couple of times where it's filled during an interview, and it's like, fuck.
I think that's
because it doesn't warn you. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we kind of agree on the art. I mean, for me, it's just like I just don't like an economic lens used as a way to. For me, it's not a judgment on what is a subjective enjoyment of art. If people have lived their whole life on time preference and judge everything by that, from diet to the economy to art, fine, cool, do what you want. It takes the soul out of life for me. It just makes everything kind of robotic. So it's just not for me. I know I'm not alone in that feeling, but I know there are other people who support that, and that's cool. We all have can exercise our freedom of speech.
Well, yeah,
we can write our books and say that's what we think, and someone can go on Twitter and say, I think that's fucking stupid, and that's what's brilliant about it.
And some of us have no taste.
All right, dude, listen, that is amazing. So officially the longest show I've ever made, 3 hours and 12 minutes. Loved it.
Hope it's enjoyable for everybody.
Always love talking to you, dude. It's a real pleasure. You should go and get some sleep.
And fun. Oh, I will. I'm going to go sleep for 3 hours and wake up and work.
All right, man. Well, listen, take care. I'm sure we'll chat again soon. And shout out to Brian Hoffman for putting out a tweet that made this happen. And take care, buddy.
Good night.
All right. What did you think of that one? Bit of a beast, right? Yeah, this was completely out of the blue, no planning. But I do enjoy conversations like this. I'd rather have a conversation where I delve into the kind of depths and narratives around Bitcoin and challenge some of them. I'm not a complete hardcore maximalist. I'm not a full-on anarcho-capitalist. I love lots of the ideas around Bitcoin and what it can do for freedom, and I love lots of the ideas around libertarianism, but I think it's important to challenge these ideas. I really do, and I like making these shows. So listen, I know this will trigger some people, and I'm sorry about that, but look, this is what I do, and I always want to get into these subjects because not everyone agrees. Some people say, look, Pete, you're just doing a tweet for attention. Like yesterday, I put one out about Ron Paul because I'd been reading up on Ron Paul and watching some videos about him. And whilst he's a libertarian, he also seems to support the idea of a state, but a minimal state, like the minarchist idea. So I put that question out. I wanted to know people's views, and then obviously one person comes in and says, you're doing this for likes and attention for the show, and it's no, I'm not. If I just wanted to get high show downloads, I would just do interviews every week with Chudemeister, Raoul Powell, and Andreas. They always get crazy numbers. Well, I had an interview with Scott Horton recently, and that had low numbers, but I want to challenge these. I want to get into these subjects. Also, look at the responses. They spark debate. There isn't universal agreement on some of these narratives. Not everyone is a hardcore maximalist. Not everyone is a hardcore libertarian, and Bitcoin is there for all. So listen, I'm going to keep making shows like this. I'm going to keep questioning narratives. I'm going to keep going down my various rabbit holes, trying to figure out where I end up. And yeah, look, if you've got any questions about it, even if you don't agree with me, I do reply to every email. So get in touch and let me know what you think. I'm very cool with that. Happy to talk about anything. Anyway, listen, I hope you're all keeping safe in the lockdown. As I said before, if you are bored, you want to check something else out, I've got a bunch of different interviews on my Defiance podcast, which is defiance.news. Also got a couple of films up there, filmed in Colombia and Venezuela. Please do check those out and let me know what you think. Anyway, stay safe, stay healthy, have a great Easter, and I will see you all next week.